Chapter 1101, The Unruly Twin Snake Staff. The crescent moon rose gracefully into the night sky, reaching its zenith before beginning its descent toward the southwest. It was well past midnight, yet the oppressive darkness could not further encroach upon Malfoy Manor. Perhaps this was due to a force more malevolent than the night itself lurking within its walls. In a south-facing bedroom on the third floor, Vitia reclined against the headboard, her white nightgown slipping slightly off her shoulders. She gazed out the window, her eyes tracing the occasional cloud drifting across the night sky. During her imprisonment in Azkaban, she often became like a frozen statue, staring out through the cell's small window, which resembled more of a vent. Though she had been released, Malfoy Manor felt like another prison, albeit with more comfort. She was under house arrest, aware that Voldemort was not a man to forgive easily. He had tolerated her insolence during his weakened state, but now that he had regained his power, retribution was inevitable. Moreover, he would not forget the disruption she caused during his crucial resurrection ceremony. Upon her release from Azkaban, Vitia had braced herself for the worst, expecting Voldemort might kill her outright. Being confined now was the best outcome she could have hoped for. The loss of physical freedom did not anger her as much as the loss of mental direction did. She had stationed her allies in the Forbidden Forest, where the centaurs would care for them, and Atticus Blaine was not entirely unaware of this. With their presence, the Holy See had discovered clues, but dared not act hastily. The Druids would recover there, living well even without her guidance. Vitia slowly raised her left hand, spreading her slender fingers as if to catch the sparse starlight scattered across the black sky. She realized that the hatred in her heart had gradually diminished. The wizarding world was increasingly isolated from the Muggle society, and most wizards lived at a leisurely pace. This slowness bred laziness, leading to decadence, making people content to blend in without questioning anything. Perhaps spending the rest of her life as a caged bird wasn't such a bad choice after all. Her fingers moved unconsciously in the air, as if skimming the surface of water. Her gentle breaths formed wisps of white mist in the dim room, and the biting cold seeped in from all directions, enveloping the bedroom. "It is ungentlemanly to enter a lady's room without permission," Vitia remarked, lowering her hand and turning toward the door. "Especially for someone who claims the noble blood of Slytherin." Voldemort stood behind the door, his black robe resembling condensed smoke, with tendrils of darkness rising from its edges. In the room, lit only by sparse starlight and moonlight, the red glow of his snake-like eyes was piercing, the two locked eyes in the darkness. Voldemort's narrow nose twitched as he regarded Vitia Cleona coldly, a hint of murderous intent in his gaze. He detected no fear or reverence in the air. "You should thank me," Voldemort said icily, "for my magnanimity in not punishing you for your little transgressions." Vitia remained silent, offering no explanation, nor did she wish to. "I came here to ask something," Voldemort continued, his voice growing colder in response to Vitia's defiance. He suppressed the murderous urge within him, raising his right arm and sweeping his wide sleeve. A peculiar staff materialized in the room, shaped like two lifelike, ferocious serpents entwined together. A sickening gray mist lingered around the staff, swirling like a whirlpool in the depths of the sea. If you stared at it too long, it felt as though your very soul might be consumed. The two serpents entwined around the staff had their eyes closed, yet upon closer inspection, the slits between their noses seemed to pulse as if they were alive. The moment Vitia's gaze fell upon the caduceus, she recoiled as if shocked by electricity, then turned her eyes to Voldemort. "I can't control." Voldemort's voice seethed with frustration. "Ever since you gave it to me, I haven't been able to cast a single spell with it. I thought it was because I had lost my body, but even now, I still can't wield it." He glared at the dormant legendary wand. "It demanded my allegiance, yet it refuses to heed my commands." "I think you may have misunderstood, Mr. Voldemort," Vitia replied. "The caduceus never claimed it would submit to you. I merely conveyed that it had sent me a message to pass it on to you. This puzzles me as well. According to our ancient Druid records, it belongs to the era of the great Druid leader Morgan Le Fay, who had no dealings with wizards." After a pause, Vitia continued, Perhaps only druids who revere nature can earn its recognition and wield its power. Awe of nature? Voldemort scoffed, a sardonic smile twisting his lips. I've never encountered anything as malevolent as this. Perhaps your people have been misguided for centuries. Vitia found herself unable to counter this. For generations, druid priests believed that some malevolent force had destroyed Avalon Island, and that the staff of the twin snakes was placed there to contain the horrors. Only after acquiring the staff and sensing its malevolent power, capable of withering all life, did she realize that the staff itself might be the entity being suppressed. Voldemort was right. This contradicted the druid's beliefs. Seeing Vitia fall silent, Voldemort reclaimed the twin snake staff. He sensed that Vitia was truthful and genuinely unaware of why he couldn't wield it. With nothing more to discuss, he prepared to leave. I must warn you, Vitia spoke again as Voldemort turned to go. She didn't look at him, but gazed out the window at the sprawling manor, where the gray mist hovered, unaffected by the wind, sapping the vitality of all living things. If you keep the twin snake staff here, eventually, no one will survive, and all your followers will perish. The apocalyptic vision of Avalon Island, with everything withering, flashed before her eyes, and her voice was cold. I have my own thoughts on this, Voldemort replied indifferently, his scarlet eyes glinting, before passing through the wall and leaving the room. In the silent room, Vitia frowned slightly, lost in thought in the darkness. As the bright sun broke through the gloom, heralding a new day, Number 12 Grimmauld Place was bustling with activity, unlike the somber Malfoy Manor. Hermione bounded upstairs, flinging open Harry and Ron's door with excitement. She stepped over the scattered newspapers and approached the two boys, who were startled awake and huddled under their quilts. Hurry up, Harry, Ron. Hogwarts has sent us our summer homework, she exclaimed joyfully. July had arrived, marking the official start of the summer vacation. End of this chapter. Chapter 1. In the heart of the bustling city, where the cacophony of life never seemed to pause, Atticus Blaine found himself standing at the edge of a new beginning. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden hue over the skyline, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming jasmine from the nearby gardens. Atticus, a man of quiet determination and thoughtful demeanor, gazed out over the cityscape with a sense of anticipation. The streets below were alive with the rhythm of evening traffic, the hum of engines blending with the distant chatter of pedestrians. Atticus, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of understated elegance, adjusted his tie and took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the culmination of years of hard work and perseverance. As he descended the steps of the grand building behind him, the weight of his decision settled comfortably on his shoulders. Atticus had always been a man of vision, someone who saw possibilities where others saw obstacles. His journey had been anything but easy, marked by challenges that tested his resolve and moments of doubt that threatened to derail his dreams. Yet through it all, he had remained steadfast, driven by an unwavering belief in his purpose. The city lights began to twinkle as dusk turned to night, and Atticus walked with a purposeful stride towards his destination. The path ahead was uncertain, but he embraced it with open arms, ready to face whatever lay in store. For Atticus Blaine, this was not just a new chapter. It was the beginning of a story that he was determined to write on his own terms. Chapter 1102, Daily Life. Spending the summer holidays at Grimmauld Place was the best experience Harry had ever had. Although the month he spent at the Weasleys during last year's Quidditch World Cup was wonderful, it was still Ron's home, and Harry couldn't shake the feeling of being a guest. At Grimmauld Place, however, he felt a sense of belonging. This was his godfather's ancestral home, and staying there felt natural. After a few days of unease, Harry's life began to settle into a routine. Each morning, he would rise earlier than Ron, Hermione, and the others to help Mrs. Weasley in the kitchen. With so many people living in the house, preparing 3 meals a day was a daunting task for her. Harry was one of the few who could genuinely assist without adding to the chaos. Despite the leisurely nature of summer vacation, breakfast was always a hurried affair. Remus and Amelia were the busiest of them all, rarely sitting at the table until the very end. Breakfast was often the only time Harry saw them during the day. Sirius, too, was frequently absent, even on weekends. When Harry questioned him about it, Sirius's gray eyes flickered with hesitation. "I'm on a mission, Harry. Amos Tower assigned it to me." "What is it?" The children at the table were eager to know, but after Mrs. Weasley coughed loudly, Sirius's hesitation vanished, and he avoided Harry's questioning gaze. "It's just some ordinary surveillance, which is boring, but someone has to do it." When Harry pressed further about who he was following, Sirius remained tight-lipped. "Grown-ups have learned to keep secrets now," Ron grumbled as they climbed the stairs. "I miss the old Sirius when he was always willing to talk to us more." "Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine asked them to do this," Ginny interjected, causing Harry and the others to turn and look at her in surprise. She was wearing a light gray-green nightgown, and Harry, standing a step above, couldn't help but notice the contrast against her skin. He shook his head slightly to clear his thoughts and asked impatiently, "How did you know that, Ginny?" "Oh." Ginny noticed the fleeting heat in Harry's green eyes, and her cheeks flushed. She whispered, "I ran into Tonks when I got up to go to the bathroom late last night. I asked her what the Order of the Phoenix was doing, but she wouldn't tell me. After a few more questions, she mentioned that Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine had instructed them not to let us know too much." "Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine ordered you to do that?" Hermione bit her lip, recalling the contempt Professor Blaine had shown her on her second day in the house, and resentment flickered in her brown eyes. "What else did Tonks say, Ginny?" "Not much else," Ginny replied, glancing quickly at Harry and taking a few deep breaths to calm her blush. "Oh, she also mentioned that there will be a meeting of the Phoenix Society in a few days. It seems to be on Friday night, and Snape will be there to give a report." "Tonks is such a nice person," Ron said sympathetically. "At least she was willing to tell us something. The other members of the Order of the Phoenix just ignore us." The group resumed their climb up the stairs. In the mornings, their main activity was gathering in Harry and Ron's bedroom, where they would read various newspapers and periodicals from London that Hermione had collected over the past 3 months. To the kitchen for a late-night snack, he stumbled upon a meeting in full swing. The room was dimly lit, with shadows flickering across the walls as the wizards and witches discussed their plans in hushed tones. Atticus Blaine, a tall and enigmatic figure, stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding attention. His eyes, sharp and discerning, scanned the room as he listened intently to the reports being shared. Harry lingered at the doorway, trying to remain unnoticed. He was captivated by the intensity of the discussions, the urgency in their voices, and the gravity of the situation they faced. It was a stark reminder of the dangerous world beyond the walls of Grimmauld Place, a world where the line between friend and foe was often blurred. As the meeting concluded, Atticus caught sight of Harry. With a nod, he beckoned him over. "Harry," he said, his voice calm yet firm, "it's important you understand the stakes. The Ministry's accusations are not just about you. They're a distraction, a way to sow discord and fear. We must stay vigilant and united." Harry nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He knew he was part of something much larger than himself, a battle that required courage and resilience. Returning to the others, Harry shared what he had overheard, and they all agreed to redouble their efforts. The newspapers, once a tedious task, now seemed like a vital piece of the puzzle. Each article, each snippet of information, could hold the key to unraveling the Ministry's deceit. As the days passed, the group fell into a routine. Mornings were spent scouring the newspapers, afternoons dedicated to homework, and evenings filled with laughter and camaraderie. Despite the looming threat, there was a sense of solidarity among them, a shared determination to uncover the truth and clear Harry's name. In the quiet moments, Harry often found himself reflecting on the events that had brought them to this point. He thought of his friends, their unwavering support, and the sacrifices they were willing to make. He thought of Atticus Blaine, whose guidance and wisdom had become invaluable. And he thought of the future, uncertain yet full of possibilities. With each passing day, Harry grew more resolute. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready to face them head-on. Together with his friends, he would fight for justice, for truth, and for the world they all believed in. Late at night, Atticus Blaine ventured downstairs in search of something to eat. To his surprise, he found his Transfiguration professor engaged in a quiet conversation with Mrs. Weasley in the kitchen. The professor appeared weary, and upon noticing Atticus, her eyes widened in surprise before she offered him a smile tinged with sympathy and pity. After exchanging brief pleasantries, Professor McGonagall vanished with a soft pop, apparating away. Anticipating that others might soon arrive in the kitchen, Mrs. Weasley quickly prepared some food for Atticus and sent him back upstairs. "I just saw Professor McGonagall down there," Atticus remarked as he returned to the bedroom. Ron, already nestled in bed, mumbled sleepily, "Really? Was she here to assign us more homework because she thinks our Transfiguration assignments aren't challenging enough?" "Who knows?" Atticus replied with a shrug, climbing into his own bed. As he closed his eyes, darkness enveloped him, and a peculiar corridor with a black door began to form in his mind's eye. End of this chapter. Chapter 1103, Targeted Killing. "Devil! You are the devil!" The woman's voice echoed through the villa's living room, illuminated by the dazzling light of a crystal chandelier. She lay sprawled on a massive Zambian bloodwood sofa, her cries filled with despair. At her feet lay the lifeless bodies of her long-serving servants and beloved dogs, victims of the sudden intruder standing before her. This intruder, an ugly old woman with broad shoulders, a hunched back, and sharp teeth, wielded a bone cane from which she had unleashed a few eerie green lights. Without the use of blades or pistols, she had turned the room into a scene of death. "God will definitely punish you, you devil," the woman wailed, collapsing further into the sofa. "Oh, God." The hunchbacked witch let out a hoarse, cruel laugh. "God can't judge me, you ridiculous scum. If you want to save your pitiful and worthless life, hand over the valuables in this house." The woman, still lying on the sandalwood sofa, slowly pushed herself up with her arms. Her gaze fell upon the corpses on the floor, her heart heavy with grief. When she turned to face the hunchbacked woman, her gray-green eyes burned with anger. "That's absurd. Why would a devil from hell need money? I have nothing to give you. Even if God can't judge you, the police will arrest you." "Police?" The hunchbacked witch seemed amused. She parted her lips, her sharp teeth clicking together. "You mean your muggle Aurors?" "Oh, the Aurors have their hands full right now. Dumbledore and Blaine are more than enough for them to handle." The witch opened her arms wide, squinting her eyes like a prisoner savoring newfound freedom. "It's wonderful. This is all thanks to the mysterious man. We no longer need to take risks doing those despicable and foolish things. Muggles have endless wealth." The woman couldn't comprehend the witch's cryptic words about Aurors, Dumbledore, Blaine, and you-know-who. All she could do was glare at the witch with pure hatred. "Compared to the others I've killed, you're quite brave," the witch sneered, her perverted smile accentuated by the hideous lines on her cheeks. "But it's just as foolish to resist after witnessing death." Speaking softly, the hunchbacked witch slowly raised her arms, relishing the woman's expression as it turned to one of terror. "Heartbreaking and bone-cutting," she chanted. The witch's shrill laughter mingled with the woman's heart-wrenching screams, piercing the silence of the night and scattering the crows circling above. A bright green light flashed once more, followed by a violent explosion that shattered the night's tranquility. Flames erupted first in the kitchen, swiftly consuming the entire luxurious villa. Muggles from the neighboring garden area heard the commotion and rushed outside, stunned by the sight of the house ablaze like a torch in the night. After a few moments of shock, they hurried back inside to call for help. 20 minutes later, fire trucks and police cars arrived in the elegant forest area, but the perpetrator had long since vanished. Upper Flagley, Yorkshire. The moonlight shimmered gently as the hunchbacked witch appeared on the outskirts of the town, at the base of a hill dotted with sparse birch trees. The night breeze rustled the leaves, and a crooked house, cobbled together from several wooden structures, stood atop the hill, partially obscured by the forest. A heavy rain earlier in the evening had left the path up the mountain slippery. The hunchbacked witch cursed under her breath as she climbed. In front of the house, a well-tended area showcased an array of unusual herbs. The witch paused, taking in the sight before her. The witch stood at the edge of the medicine garden, her eyes darting nervously from the garden to the crooked wooden house's door. The ground bore no footprints. The traps and alarm spells remained untriggered, and the room was shrouded in darkness. Her little cuties, as she affectionately called them, were silent. With a sigh of relief, she straightened her hunched back slightly. People like her often found themselves in trouble, and while the Ministry of Magic posed a threat, it was the vengeance from those they had wronged that truly terrified them. Approaching the door, the hunchbacked witch tapped her withered vine staff against her muddy boots, which instantly dried. She then rapped on the door with her cane, and the chain on the door knocker sprang to life, slithering out with a clanking sound like a snake. The door creaked open with a sharp, piercing noise, and a wave of darkness rushed over her, making her feel oddly refreshed. As she entered the house, the gas lamp hanging from the decaying ceiling flickered on, casting a dim light. On the wooden table in the dining area lay a plate with a bloody, dark green liver, its origin from some magical creature unknown, now completely consumed by maggots. The witch glanced at it with regret, but then looked at the bulge under her linen robe, smiling with satisfaction as she ascended the stairs to the laboratory on the second floor. "Hey, my little cuties, you must be starving. Oh, don't worry, Mommy is here to take care of you," she cackled, her smile unsettling. The gas lamp on the second floor illuminated a massive fish tank adorned with magical patterns. Instead of fish, it contained swirling black clouds, resembling thunderclouds in a storm, with only a few scarlet points glimmering within. The witch hurried to the tank, pressing her twisted, smiling face against the glass. But within seconds, her smile twisted into a grimace. Something was amiss. Her little cuties usually greeted her with happy screams, but now they huddled in a corner, seemingly terrified. Someone else was in the room. Realization dawned on her, and she turned her gaze sharply to the sofa across the room. Her eyes narrowed as she recognized the intruder. "Atticus Blaine! And the Golden Viper!" she shrieked, her voice suddenly sharp. "Aren't you supposed to be dead? Where did you hear such a rumor?" came a lazy, hoarse voice from behind a twisted vortex mask. The gas lamp flickered as the witch's shrill screams filled the air. "You broke the rules, Foley, tarnished your reputation, and I'll tell the wizards of the underworld about you." "Calm down, Winrelly," the Golden Viper said, rising slowly. "It's not gentlemanly. We don't have any deep-seated hatred, do we, Golden Viper?" Winrelly's demeanor shifted as the Golden Viper stood. "At most, just minor conflicts, nothing worth mentioning. With the Dark Lord's return, there are plenty of opportunities for profit. There's no need for us to kill each other." "Did we have a conflict?" Atticus Blaine paused, tilting his head in thought. After a moment, he shrugged slightly. "Forget it. I won't kill you over trivial matters." Bang! It seemed it was all for revenge. A flicker of resentment crossed the hunchbacked witch's eyes. She abruptly stepped back, spun around, and swung her cane with tremendous force against the fish tank. Crack! With a deafening explosion, terrifying roars and howls erupted from the decrepit old house. The black clouds contained within the fish tank suddenly expanded to many times their original size, swirling like a hurricane. "Destroy them for me!" A hoarse voice screamed through the howling wind. A few spots of scarlet light flickered momentarily in the raging storm before the chaos resumed with renewed intensity. The black cloud surged forward, enveloping the hunchbacked witch. It seemed as though the cloud was infused with iron filings, stripping away her flesh and blood layer by layer. Under the watchful eyes of Golden Viper and Fry, the witch was reduced to a grim skeleton in mere seconds. End of this chapter. Chapter 1104. A huge and costly mission clang. The white skeleton, still stained with traces of blood, crashed to the ground with a resounding thud, scattering insects from beneath the decaying wooden floor. The hunchbacked witch had been vanquished, and the black hurricane, formed by swirling mists, began to dissipate. Suspended in midair, 4 or 5 pairs of scarlet eyes fixated on the Golden Viper. Swish! The black mist coalesced once more, not fleeing but retreating into the shattered glass fish tank, where it trembled under the Viper's gaze. Atticus Blaine, momentarily speechless, lifted his cloak, revealing a young face as the magical vortex on his visage faded away. "What on earth is this?" he wondered aloud. Really had attempted to use her creatures against them, only to be fatally betrayed by her own machinations. The scene was both horrific and surreal. Cacus, staring in horror at the freshly unearthed skeleton and the swirling black clouds within the fish tank, asked in a dazed voice, "I don't know." Atticus shook his head, acknowledging the truth. The chaotic methods of these secret witches were a far cry from the practices of modern wizards. He could only sense that the thoughts emanating from the black clouds were not human, but more akin to those of magical creatures. "What should we do with this cursed thing?" Cacus inquired. "It must be dealt with, or the villagers down the mountain will suffer," Atticus murmured. The entity in the fish tank seemed to comprehend his words. As soon as Atticus spoke, the black smoke surged violently. Prick! A sudden, piercing scream forced Cacus to his knees, clutching his ears in agony. Even Atticus felt his mind waver momentarily. In that fleeting instant, the black cloud expanded, shattering the fish tank, and then hurtled toward the window like a meteor. Just as they were about to escape the house, time seemed to freeze. A golden spark drifted through the stillness, and upon touching the black mist, it ignited into a fireball, leaving only a few wisps of green smoke in its wake. A gentle breeze swept through the broken window, dispelling the stench from the room. At last, the bright moonlight could illuminate the once dim space. "How many is this, Cacus?" Atticus asked calmly, destroying the bones on the ground before returning to the sofa. Wiping the cold sweat from his brow, Cacus retrieved a parchment filled with names from his coat. His finger traced the list, stopping at a name. "No," he said, looking up with hesitation. "That's 17 in 10 days, Mr. Blaine. Do you think we should pause for a while? Although we've kept our actions discreet, the disappearance of so many prominent figures from the underground world in such a short time is bound to arouse suspicion." "I'll defer to your judgment," Atticus replied. "I have an appointment to discuss something. By the way, Cacus, I have a mission I need to entrust to you." The renowned Atticus Blaine, when he set his mind to something, had many willing to assist him, yet he still needed to issue commissions in the underground world. Cacus immediately understood that this task would not be simple. "Of course, then." Cacus quickly retrieved his notebook from his coat pocket. "What is the specific content of the mission?" "Well, it's an escort mission involving a substantial amount of wealth," Atticus mused. "The person who accepts this commission must be highly skilled, as it will be perilous. There will almost certainly be attempts to hijack it. Naturally, the contract must include strict stipulations. Of their abilities will be more systematic and fair." Atticus Blaine listened intently, his expression unwavering as he absorbed Cacus's suggestions. "That's a wise approach," he acknowledged, his voice steady and thoughtful. "We need to ensure that the secret witches are integrated into our society with respect and recognition for their unique talents." Cacus, feeling the weight of the task ahead, nodded in agreement. "I'll begin drafting the framework immediately. We must ensure that the integration process is seamless and beneficial for all parties involved." As they stood on the mountaintop, the cool breeze rustling their robes, Atticus turned his gaze back to the sprawling landscape below. The lights twinkled like stars fallen to earth, casting a serene glow over the valley. "It's a beautiful view," he remarked, his tone contemplative, "a reminder of the world we're working to protect." Cacus followed his gaze, the enormity of their mission settling over him. "Yes, it is," he replied softly, "and it's worth every effort we make." With a final nod, Atticus and Cacus descended the mountain, their minds already racing with plans and strategies. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but they were determined to see it through, driven by a shared vision of a better future for both wizards and witches alike. The role of the Ministry of Magic is crucial. "Of course," Atticus Blaine said, pursing his lips thoughtfully. "Your learning machine workshop is currently very popular in the magical world. Its generous compensation package attracts many applicants. If this workshop can set an example by issuing a statement that it is willing to recruit secret wizards who pass the assessment mechanism, it would be beneficial." "That's not a problem at all," Atticus nodded in agreement. "I'll find an opportunity to discuss this with Remus. Remember to warn them that any inappropriate magic must be abandoned. We are building a bridge for them to integrate to modern wizarding society, and they must be willing to make some sacrifices. Cacus nodded in agreement. Well, I have to head to Paris, Atticus, he said, patting Atticus on the shoulder with a warm smile. Thank you for taking care of the matters I've entrusted to you. See you later. With those words, Atticus vanished into the gentle breeze that swept across the mountains. End of this chapter. Chapter 1105, Atticus Blaine's Ambition, Paris, Gringotts World Bank headquarters. The sky was a tapestry of light and shadow, with a hazy half-moon casting its glow over the verdant valley below. A clear stream meandered through the valley, winding its way into a small town, its waters flowing past countless homes via canals flanking the ancient stone road. This town was a testament to antiquity, with every household boasting an iron stove and several sets of gleaming silver armor displayed at their doorsteps. As Atticus Blaine approached the fountain at the crossroads, he paused to take in the ancient town. His nostrils flared slightly, catching the scent of history carried by the breeze through the deserted streets. Amazing, Atticus murmured, clapping his hands in admiration. Is this where your ancestors lived? Indeed, Mr. Blaine, replied Bana, nodding slowly. According to human chronology, the ancestors of the fairies established this town around the 3rd century A.D. Historical records name it Shuangyu Town. Though Bana spoke calmly, a hint of sadness lingered in his eyes. Atticus's gaze drifted to the mountains flanking the town. Though not particularly tall, they exuded a majestic presence. With his keen eyesight, Atticus discerned that these were no magical illusions but genuine mountains. He shook his head slowly, astounded by the goblin's dedication. You've recreated this town within this building. Is it meant as a last resort? Unlike humans, we goblins hold our history in high regard, Bana replied in a measured tone. We rebuilt it to honor our ancestors' arduous journey. Of course, your assumption is correct. It is indeed a formidable fortress. Atticus remained silent, his hands clenched into fists behind his back, his thumbs rubbing his knuckles. The greenery had invaded the ancient town, with verdant vines draping the rooftops and vibrant flowers softening the town's earthy, blacksmith atmosphere. The quaint town resembled something out of a fairy tale. This is indeed a solid fortress, Atticus observed, his eyes glinting with a faint purple light. Even I cannot force a passage into this town. As one of the last great magicians in the world, Atticus's praise was well-deserved for the town the goblins had painstakingly recreated. Yet, old Bana showed no joy. He gazed at the town with melancholy as the breeze stirred the smoke, casting a dim veil over the scene. A great wizard like you must understand that no fortress is truly impenetrable. The most perfect refuge is one never used. If we ever activate this place, it means the fairies face disaster. I sincerely hope it remains a place for appreciating history, Bana said, looking at Atticus, who stood beside the fountain shaped like an ancient fairy hero. His eyes, clouded with a white film, showed hesitation, but he spoke his mind. It has been a pleasure to collaborate with you, Mr. Blaine. Whether through the Learning Machine Workshop or the Tri-Wizard Tournament broadcast, the goblins have gained much. However, Bana tapped the floor with his cane, the dull thud echoing like a death knell, casting a lonely, decadent air over the ancient town. If we agree to your recent request, Mr. Blaine. The old goblin approached Atticus with sincerity. I'm afraid the time before. The fairies using this shelter will soon begin their countdown, Atticus Blaine remarked, casting a solemn glance at the old goblin, Bana. Our existence isn't merely about survival, he continued. After the goblins led the intelligent and magical creatures in a war against the wizards and lost, a century or two ago, they wisely shifted from traditional alchemical equipment manufacturing and luxury goods to the burgeoning financial industry. This decision, made with extraordinary foresight, allowed the goblins to amass unimaginable wealth and re-establish their place in the magical world. As Atticus and Bana resumed their walk along the ancient streets, the sound of gurgling water accompanied them. The future of the fairies seems bright, and everything appears to be going well, but if this trend continues, what do you think will happen? Atticus asked, breaking the silence that had enveloped old Bana. What awaits you is a massacre far more brutal than any before, Atticus warned. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the valley, causing the armor and exquisite cold weapons hanging in the streets and alleys to jingle ominously. A mysterious and foreboding atmosphere settled over the fairy town of Shuangyue. You possess wealth far exceeding that of the wizards, yet you lack the power to protect it, Atticus stated, his calm voice tinged with a sense of impending doom. The wizards' butcher knives will eventually claim your heads, and the wealth you've accumulated over the past 2 centuries will be drenched in goblin blood. It's only a matter of time. If Voldemort doesn't do it, and I don't do it, someone else will. But you promised to help the goblins at the right time. Banna protested, his old body trembling with fear at the grim future Atticus had painted. Now is the right time, Banna, Atticus replied solemnly. But forgive my bluntness, Mr. Blaine. If we follow your plan, before the wizards raise their butcher knives, the Dark Lord will not spare us, and we will lose the trust of the wizards. Banna's voice was hoarse with indignation. For the greater good, Banna, Atticus maintained his calm demeanor. A short-term sacrifice for a greater good. If the return of the Dark Lord will bring significant changes to the entire European magical world, if the goblins don't seize this opportunity to integrate into the wave of change and find their new place in the emerging order, will they cling to their old ways and wait for the wizards to strike? A light drizzle began to fall in Shuangyue town, thickening the fog. Atticus and Banna seemed to stand in a lost secret realm, surrounded by a swirling haze. I've been contemplating an idea, Banna, Atticus said, his gaze fixed on the swaying town. Thousands of years ago, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, 4 visionary wizards, understood that magical education must extend beyond family boundaries to a broader audience, or magic would decline. Over the past millennium, their successors have implemented these ideas well, but there has been no fundamental progress. I believe Hogwarts should become a more comprehensive magic school. Banna suddenly raised his head, staring at Atticus Blaine in astonishment. If I understand correctly, you mean... Banna was speechless, shaking his head in disbelief. That's impossible, Mr. Blaine. Atticus chuckled, his laughter clear and hearty, echoing through the misty streets. The mist and rain parted as the sound pierced through the haze that shrouded Shuangyue town, echoing throughout the valley. Nothing is impossible, my dear Banna. Everything depends on human effort, doesn't it? End of this chapter. Anything particularly interesting? What are you all up to? She asked, her eyes darting between them with curiosity. Harry, who had been on the verge of sharing his strange dreams, hesitated for a moment. Nothing much, he replied, trying to sound casual. Just talking about how we're stuck here. Ginny nodded, understanding their frustration. I know it's tough being cooped up, but it's for our safety, she said, echoing the sentiments they had heard countless times before. Ron, still restless, sat up and grumbled. Safety or not, it feels like we're prisoners. I just wish we could do something useful. Hermione, ever the voice of reason, added, We have to trust the Order. They know what they're doing, even if it means keeping us in the dark for now. Ginny, sensing the tension in the room, tried to lighten the mood. Well, at least we have each other, right? And who knows, maybe we'll get some news soon. Harry appreciated her attempt to lift their spirits, but his mind was still preoccupied with the mysterious corridor from his dreams. He knew he needed to share it with his friends, but the timing never seemed right. As the evening wore on, the 4 of them settled into a more comfortable silence, each lost in their thoughts. The room was filled with the soft rustling of pages as Hermione returned to her newspaper, and the occasional creak of the floorboards as Ron shifted restlessly on his bed. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. The air was thick with the unspoken worries and hopes of young wizards caught in a world far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Finally, Harry broke the silence. I think we should try to find out more about what's going on, he said, his voice firm with determination. We can't just sit here and do nothing. Ron and Hermione exchanged glances, and Ginny nodded in agreement. You're right, Harry, Hermione said. We need to be prepared for whatever comes next. With a newfound resolve, the 4 friends began to discuss their next steps, determined to play their part in the fight against Voldemort, even if it meant starting with small, secretive steps within the confines of Grimmauld Place. Ginny smiled slyly, her eyes twinkling with mischief. If anyone's up for some fun, they can come with me. Ron eyed his little sister with suspicion. What kind of ideas are you cooking up this time? Are you planning to give Fred and George free guinea pigs again? Harry, intrigued, stopped talking and turned his attention to Ginny. He noticed she had recently taken to wearing a light gray-green nightgown with delicate tulle and suspenders. Oh, it does involve Fred and George, Ginny replied with a grin. But this time, I think they've truly invented something amazing. If you want to see it, come along. If I hadn't caught them sneaking around the kitchen, they would have kept it a secret. Ginny's mysterious demeanor piqued Harry's curiosity, as well as Ron's and Hermione's. Eager to uncover the secret, they quickly followed Ginny to the 4th floor. The sign on Fred and George's door had been humorously altered to read, "Studying hard, please do not disturb," which elicited a chuckle from Hermione. "State your name," called a voice from inside, indistinguishable as either Fred or George. "It's me," Ginny replied in a playful tone. "I've brought them with me." After a few seconds, the door creaked open. Harry peered inside, squinting into the dimly lit room. The sun had set, and Fred and George hadn't bothered to turn on any lights. Heavy curtains blocked out the moonlight and street lamp glow. "What on earth are you doing?" Ron asked, frowning at Fred. "Why is it so dark in here?" "A bit of mystery is essential for this kind of thing, my dear brother," Fred replied matter-of-factly. As Harry stepped into the room, he stumbled over something on the floor, but Ginny caught him just in time. "Oh, sorry," he mumbled, feeling the warmth and fresh scent of her presence. His heart raced, but he quickly regained his composure. Ginny's cheeks flushed, her voice barely audible. The floor was littered with debris, likely the handiwork of Fred and George. Harry carefully navigated the mess, aided by the faint light from the open door. He saw George sitting on the bed, his back to them, engrossed in some task. Click! Fred shut the door, plunging the room into complete darkness. He then drew his wand, casting a faint glow that barely illuminated the space. "If it weren't for our observant little sister, you wouldn't have the chance to witness this groundbreaking invention so soon," Fred declared. Ron rolled his eyes, ready with a sarcastic retort, but George suddenly straightened up, inserting something into his ears. "It's done," he announced. Ginny and Fred eagerly joined George, each picking up a small object from the bed and placing it in their ears. "Allow me to introduce our masterpiece, the monitoring ear," George beamed. "We initially called it the retractable ear. We nearly completed the first version in 5th grade, but Professor Blaine's surveillance mirror inspired us. After some challenging improvements, we finally perfected it. To honor Professor Blaine's inspiration, we borrowed the name from his surveillance mirror," Fred added excitedly. In the darkness, Harry, Hermione, and Ron exchanged glances. Monitoring mirror and monitoring ears. In a sudden rush of excitement, all three lunged toward George's bed, eager to try out the invention. Harry couldn't wait to grab one of the soft little objects he felt. The first sound that reached Atticus Blaine's ears was the clinking of cutlery. "Isn't Atticus coming?" a voice inquired. "That's Bill's voice," Ron thought, stunned. "He's also in the Order of the Phoenix?" A group of people, including Harry, shot Ron a warning look, signaling him to keep quiet. The sound coming through the surveillance device was accompanied by a faint hissing, making it difficult to hear clearly. "He sent me a message saying he'd be late," another voice responded, and Harry recognized it as Mrs. Weasley's. "Where's Snotlout? He's supposed to give a report today, isn't he?" Sirius's voice dripped with disdain for Professor Snape. "I hope he has something useful to say. Otherwise, he's not welcome in my house." Boom. There was a slight explosion. "Your house? That doesn't align with some of the rumors I've heard, Blake." Snape's cold, sarcastic voice cut through the air. "From what I understand, the house now belongs to Atticus." End of this chapter. Chapter 1107. For what? "This is none of your business, Snotlout." Sirius glared icily at Severus, his voice dripping with indifference. "Oh, I just thought you'd be ashamed of this, Black." Severus ignored the helpless expressions of those in the kitchen, feigning sympathy. "After spending 13 years in Azkaban, the first thing you do upon release is lose your ancestral home. The ancestors of the Black family must be so proud of you, right?" Sirius, seething with anger, stood up abruptly. "Want to fight, Snotlout? I'm more than willing." "Does it have to be this way?" Remus interjected, shaking his head with a weary smile. The moon's growing brightness had left him feeling weak and vulnerable once again. Sirius. The tension between Sirius and Severus was palpable, making Amelia uneasy. She called out softly, "Sirius." Sirius pressed his lips together, tearing his gaze away from Snape's mocking face, and sat back down in silence. "Severus." Mrs. Weasley nervously wiped her hands on her apron. "I suppose you haven't had dinner yet?" The dining table was crowded with familiar faces, including former students like Bill and Tonks. In light of this, Severus refrained from further verbal sparring. He scanned the room and found a seat between Mr. Weasley and Tonks. "Dumbledore said he wasn't coming." Snape's first words after sitting down took everyone by surprise. "What trouble is holding Albus back?" Lupin asked, clearly taken aback. "I suggest you ask our charming headmaster yourself," Severus replied, accepting a plate from Mrs. Weasley with a barely perceptible nod, his tone laced with sarcasm. "He's always elusive." The news cast a shadow over the gathering. Dumbledore was the backbone of the Order of the Phoenix, and his absence left everyone feeling a bit uneasy. "Where do you think Professor Dumbledore has gone?" Hermione asked Harry meaningfully in Fred and George's room. "Needless to say, he's probably searching for clues," Ron chimed in. "He must be trying to figure out what the Ministry is up to." A mix of gratitude and guilt welled up in Harry. Despite their limited communication in recent years, Dumbledore's concern for him had never waned, and he continued to work tirelessly to help Harry with his problems. "Listen," Ginny suddenly whispered, covering her ears. "They're starting to talk about you, Harry." Harry quickly pushed aside his sentimental thoughts and listened intently. "Can you find out anything from the Ministry, Arthur, about Harry?" Sirius, Harry's godfather, asked. "You work for the Ministry too, Sirius," Mr. Weasley replied glumly. "There should be some talk. It's widely believed that Harry murdered the Muggles as a joke, but no one has the courage to confront the Minister about it. Dirk in the Goblin office claims to have inside information, but you know he's prone to exaggeration, so I'd say he's just boasting." "Oh, I see through their tricks." Ephius Doge coughed and said, "The Minister of Magic must have pinned the blame on that poor child for someone else's misdeeds." A buzz of discussion followed, and Sirius raised his voice, his frustration evident. "This is indeed the most likely scenario, but the key point is that if Fudge wants to successfully frame Harry, he must establish a connection between the murder case and Harry. Over the past year, Harry has been at Hogwarts. The only time he was in London was with me and Remus. He was in our sight the whole time." "What do Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine have in mind?" Bill asked. "Albus wrote to me saying that Atticus will solve Harry's problems," Remus said, his concern evident. "I think Atticus hasn't shown up these days because he's investigating this matter." "I don't think so," Mr. Weasley said heavily. "He was seen in Paris." "I don't think we need to go to Paris to uncover the clues," Atticus Blaine remarked. "Dawlish must know the inside story." Sirius's eyes narrowed, flashing with anger. "Perhaps we should consider more direct measures." "The Dementors would be thrilled to have you back, Black," Severus Slack sneered, causing Sirius to pale once more. "We need to be prepared," Alastor shouted. "Whether Fudge has thought through the serious consequences or not, he's set things in motion. There are only two outcomes. Either Potter is finished, or he is. We need a security plan to ensure Potter's safe arrival at the Ministry of Magic that day, and his safe departure." "Oh, listen to you, Alastor," Mungdens muttered uneasily from his corner. "It's as if the Order of the Phoenix is planning to declare war on the Ministry of Magic." The thought was unsettling. The Ministry was the legitimate governing body of the British wizarding world. Many wizards had acted against it in secret, but open defiance was a different matter, even making Sirius frown at the thought. Boom! A sharp sound echoed from the wooden door on the stairs, and Alastor's magical eye immediately scanned the area. "Ah, the key player has arrived," Moody chuckled hoarsely. "Sorry, everyone, I've been away for a bit." Atticus Blaine appeared, greeting everyone with a smile as he scanned the room. His gaze finally settled on the cupboard. Not all members of the Order of the Phoenix had met Atticus before, and some were seeing this newly renowned wizard for the first time. They stood and bowed respectfully, to which Atticus responded with a gracious nod and smile. "Did I miss anything important?" Atticus asked, settling into the seat Sirius had vacated for him. He thanked Mrs. Weasley for the plate, cleared his throat, and smiled. "Severus hasn't started his report yet, Atticus," Remus replied with a smile. "But there's something urgent. It would be great if you could give us your thoughts before the formal meeting begins." "What is it, Remus?" Atticus inquired with interest, cutting into his sausage. "The Beauxbatons champion," Remus began carefully. "She submitted her resume to the workshop. I had a chat with her, as per protocol." Remus hesitated. Atticus's eyebrows twitched slightly. He had almost forgotten about it. Fleur had indeed consulted him earlier, asking whether working at the Ministry of Magic or studying at the machine workshop would offer more potential for development if she stayed in the UK. But Atticus knew Fleur had ulterior motives. Ah, that girl. Before the Triwizard Tournament, the Daily Prophet mentioned she was part Vila, Tonks said, tossing her seaweed-colored wavy hair and looking at Remus with a teasing smile. "I bet she's got you all flustered, hasn't she, Remus?" Ahem. Remus's pale face flushed with embarrassment. "Your joke is amusing, Tonks, but, well, Miss Delacour is an exceptional young witch. She fully meets our workshop's criteria for outstanding young talent. I initially planned to hire her based on her abilities," Remus said sincerely, glancing at Atticus. "Miss Delacour was very candid during our conversation. She openly stated her intention to work in the UK. This left me uncertain, so I told her I needed time to think." "For what?" Harry asked groggily from the fourth-floor room. "Did I not hear correctly?" "To clear your name, Mr. Potter," Hermione snapped, rolling her eyes in exasperation. End of this chapter. Chapter 1108, Heavy Calculations. Everyone at the table looked at Atticus Blaine with interest. "I won't offer any advice, Remus," Atticus said, his demeanor calm and collected, despite the disappointment of those around him. He continued to eat his dinner without a hint of embarrassment or awkwardness. "If you feel Miss Fleur Delacour meets the requirements, then you may recruit her into the workshop." "Oh," Remus nodded thoughtfully. "I think I see what you mean, Atticus." "Honestly," Sirius chimed in with amusement, "you should make some progress in this area, Atticus." Atticus remained unfazed. "There's no need to imitate Dumbledore in everything," he replied. However, Severus's expressionless comment made Atticus cough softly. Atticus raised his head and glanced at Severus, his meaning clear. "You have no right to comment on my personal life." Of course, Atticus couldn't really confront Severus in front of so many people. Seeing that everyone had put down their forks, he flicked his wand, and the plates on the long table vanished instantly. "Let's have a meeting." Suddenly, a shrill scream pierced the air. In a room on the fourth floor, several people fell onto the bed, covering their ears and howling. "What happened?" Ron exclaimed, hurriedly pulling out his earplugs and tossing them to the ground. Fred rolled over and scrambled to turn on the light. The sudden brightness caused several people to groan in pain again, and the smoking earplugs in their hands made everyone look sullen. "Can't you just let us take advantage of the loophole?" Ginny said angrily. Harry was equally furious. They were Voldemort's followers, so why did they have to be so vigilant against them? Besides, shouldn't he be qualified to attend the meeting? It was he who had defeated Voldemort's forces last time, causing him to lie dormant for 14 years. It was he who had stopped Voldemort from stealing the Philosopher's Stone, and it was he who had witnessed Voldemort's resurrection. This time, he was also the target of the Ministry of Magic's conspiracy. If the Order of the Phoenix and Professor Blaine couldn't crack Fudge's conspiracy, then he would be imprisoned unjustly like Sirius. The more Harry thought about it, the angrier he became. He even had the urge to rush down to find Professor Blaine and ask him whether he was taking his case seriously. Professor Blaine was about to go on trial, but instead of investigating the truth, he had run off to Paris. Did he feel that Harry was of no use anymore? "Harry," Ginny's voice broke through Harry's inner rage. "What?" Harry looked towards Ginny, and immediately a few lines of worry appeared on his forehead. Ginny looked at him with a mixture of shock and fear, as if she was frightened by something. "Your eyes. Just now." "What happened to my eyes?" Harry asked impatiently. Hermione, Ron, Fred, and George all looked at the two of them inquiringly. "Well," Ginny hesitated, pursing her lips. "Nothing. Maybe it was the light. I saw it wrong." "Oh, okay." It was as if a basin of cold water had been poured over his head, and Harry suddenly snapped back to reality. He couldn't believe what he had just been thinking. Since there's no more drama, he muttered, feeling suffocated by the strange looks from the others. He quickly dodged their gazes and jumped off George's bed. I'm going back to my room. I'll continue reading those Muggle newspapers. Maybe I'll be lucky enough to find some clues. With that, he swiftly left the room. By the time Harry rushed downstairs to his room, Hermione and Ron had caught up. "Why did you get mad at Ginny just now?" Ron asked, glaring at Harry with a hint of anger. Harry, sitting on the edge of the bed, hesitated. He couldn't describe his thoughts to Ron and Hermione unless he wanted to face their contempt. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice dull. Wanted to ask something, but Hermione gently tugged at the corner of Ron's robe, concealing the worry in her brown eyes. "By the way, Harry, I remember you seemed to want to tell us something before going upstairs. So those despicable guys finally decided to stay here and fight us?" Alastair's words, tinged with a hint of regret, echoed the thoughts of many. "That's a good thing for us, Alastair," Remus replied, his tone carrying a subtle reprimand. "Albus and we have worked tirelessly for years, hoping to prevent the harm caused by Voldemort and the Death Eaters from endangering more lives." "Sometimes," Mr. Weasley began, but fell silent. Mrs. Weasley, however, managed a weak smile and said tremulously, "I really hope we aren't the ones who have to endure this." "But Molly," Remus caught the underlying meaning in Mrs. Weasley's words and responded earnestly, "if Voldemort's power spreads abroad, we'll face even greater trouble. The Death Eaters can employ all sorts of illegal means to dismantle the ministries of magic in various countries. They act without restraint, committing all manner of evil, while we cannot. This will only place us in a more vulnerable position." "I know, I was just thinking," Mrs. Weasley blew her nose sadly. "Maybe not for Fabian and Gideon." Mr. Weasley sighed heavily, then stood up and wrapped his arm around his wife. A heavy sadness settled over the basement kitchen. In this conflict that has persisted for nearly half a century, who among them hasn't lost relatives to persecution? Adam Vogel. Severus's detached tone clashed with the somber atmosphere. He looked calmly at Atticus Blaine, who was idly twirling his wand, his eyes deep and inscrutable. "This man has shown intelligence far beyond that of the typical Death Eaters. Only you know him. You apprehended him personally." Atticus remained silent, not out of shame, but because he couldn't reveal the truth to those before him. The reason he didn't kill Adam Vogel and Jasna Rosier upon their capture, and even intervened personally to send them to Azkaban instead of Exeter, was to hand them over to Voldemort. Both individuals were crucial. One determined whether the entire European wizarding community would unite against a common enemy to address a greater wizarding crisis potentially caused by Voldemort. The other was linked to whether the one in Neugamund would awaken from perdition. "Never mind, Atticus." Sirius misunderstood Atticus's silence. He patted Atticus on the shoulder and said nonchalantly, "You're not a prophet, so you can't predict everything. So, the descendant of the former president of the International Confederation of Wizards is now tasked by Voldemort to assassinate Amelia, right?" Sirius's gray eyes sparkled with excitement rather than concern. "I want to see what he's going to do." "Always be alert, Sirius." Alastair slammed the table hard, startling everyone. "This Vogel seems to be more adept at conspiracy than most Death Eaters." Severus cast a sarcastic glance at Sirius, but offered no further instructions. He continued to focus on Atticus and said, "I don't think Adam Vogel will make a move against Amelia before Mr. Potter's trial. The Dark Lord is also waiting to see what unfolds. Dumbledore believes that the Dark Lord isn't overly concerned about who gains power. He's more interested in the prophecy orb in the Department of Mysteries as it pertains to how he was defeated last time. The prophecy orb that foretold the rise of Harry Potter, the one who could vanquish the most malevolent wizard in history." Everyone's breath caught, their faces filled with awe. "Did Voldemort mention how he plans to obtain the prophecy?" Remus asked cautiously. "If he doesn't want to be exposed to Albus and Atticus for the time being." Severus paused, considering his response. Atticus Blaine shook his head with a steely resolve. "The Dark Lord is determined to obtain that item, so we can assume he will try to use Potter. It's not a difficult assumption, is it? After all, Mr. Potter is known for his impulsiveness." Before Sirius could lose his temper, Atticus raised a hand to halt him. Does Headmaster Dumbledore have any other suggestions? I informed Dumbledore that the Dark Lord has changed somewhat since his resurrection. He seems to have gained control over some new power, Severus said. New power, Tonks exclaimed, her face pale with fear. However, noticing that no one else reacted and instead focused intently on Severus and Atticus, she quickly fell silent. Are you certain he's in control of it? Atticus narrowed his eyes, a cold glint flashing in their depths. Severus hesitated, his uncertainty evident in every word. I'm not sure, but he does seem to be wielding magic he hasn't used before. Dumbledore asked me to seek your opinion on this matter, Atticus, Severus continued, his voice trailing off as the weight of the question hung in the air. End of this chapter. Chapter 1109, The Reason for Not Being Under Control. Dumbledore had asked Severus to consult him. Was this a premature realization? Atticus Blaine's face was solemn, and the aura around him was as heavy as lead and mercury. The power he exuded silently influenced those around him. The members of the Order of the Phoenix, gathered in the kitchen, looked at him in awe as he pondered deeply. No, what Dumbledore noticed was not the crucial question. The key issue lay in the changes that had occurred in Voldemort. What kind of power? Atticus's gaze, as weighty as a mountain, fell on Severus. Very evil, Severus replied, his face turning pale as he recalled the ominous feeling and revulsion he experienced at Malfoy Manor. It feels as if everyone's life is being drained away constantly. A collective gasp echoed through the room, and even the flames from the candlesticks on the long table flickered slightly. It's particularly unwise to go against the Dark Lord. Mungdens shivered, his ugly yellow teeth chattering. If you're scared, go ahead and do your shady business. Mad Eye glared fiercely at Mungdens, the scar on his face twisting. You coward! Why don't you tell us how many silver spoons you stole tonight? Oh, I didn't, Mungdens stammered, his face reddening with shame. He clutched his sleeves tightly, speaking in a choked voice while glancing nervously at Sirius and Atticus. But neither Sirius nor Atticus had time to concern themselves with Mungdens' bad habits. Are you covering for Voldemort? Sirius demanded, glaring at Severus with dissatisfaction. Why don't you explain it more clearly? Severus twitched his lips, instinctively wanting to retort, but he restrained himself and whispered, I am also restricted by the magic there, so I can't reveal too much information. Many nodded in understanding, though some harbored hidden doubts. Atticus remained silent. There was no doubt that the power Severus described was the same magical force that caused everything to wither, which he had witnessed during his journey to the Isle of Avalon. The once vibrant island had been turned into a desolate place under the erosion of that force. If he hadn't followed the path opened by Gryffindor, he would have paid a heavy price just to reach the temple at the island's center. Even Merlin couldn't remove that power. The legendary wizard could only uproot the temple, originally located on the island of Azkaban, and place it on Avalon. He used the fearless faith in King Arthur's broken steel sword and his own profound magical skills to barely prevent that power from contaminating the entire world. Atticus had briefly encountered that power. Objectively speaking, he was far from being a match for it. Despite his rapid improvement in magical abilities over the past 2 years, he was still no match. It was a power from a completely higher dimension. The source of that deathly power came from the double snake staff. When he learned that Vitia was associating with Voldemort on the eve of last year's Quidditch World Cup final, he was deeply concerned. Regardless of the basis, the twin snake staff would make Voldemort more formidable, and once the staff was wielded by him, no one could restrain him. However, over the past year, Voldemort's actions had been in line with common sense. This convinced Atticus that Voldemort had lost control of the wand. Atticus's eyelids fluttered slightly as he was lost in thought. This was true even today. If Voldemort truly controlled the caduceus, with the power of that sacred staff, he would never have been so restrained. The most logical course would be to march straight to Hogwarts, declaring, "Those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will perish." The twin snakes recognized Voldemort, but did not lend him their power. This question puzzled Atticus, leaving him deep in contemplation. It took Atticus Blaine a considerable amount of time to devise a reasonable explanation. Perhaps there was some sort of agreement between the two parties. If Voldemort wished to harness the power of the twin snakes, he would have to comply with certain conditions or assist in achieving a particular goal. Clearly, Voldemort had not yet fulfilled these conditions. Following this line of reasoning, it wasn't difficult to speculate on the demands the double snake caduceus might impose. This was the future Atticus had always been wary of, a future that seemed increasingly likely. Why else would Merlin and the founders of Hogwarts leave him so many revelations spanning centuries? Should such a crisis arise, it would transcend the confines of the British wizarding world, impacting the entire magical community and even the Muggle world. Only by uniting could they hope to confront such a threat. As for why Dumbledore entrusted this matter to him, Atticus suspected it had something to do with Vicia. With his extensive knowledge of magic, Dumbledore might have uncovered some ancient secrets about the Druid sect from old texts. "Don't worry too much," Atticus reassured the group, noticing their concerned expressions. He smiled warmly. "You know, Vidia Cleona's power is tied to the secret witch school. Voldemort may have drawn some inspiration from her, but for now, that isn't enough to tip the scales in his favor against both me and Headmaster Dumbledore." Atticus's calm demeanor provided comfort to the younger members of the Order of the Phoenix, like Bill and Tonks. However, those with more experience or a deeper understanding of Atticus knew the situation was likely more complex. "But that Cleona," Mungdons muttered cautiously, shrinking back in his seat after a glare from Mad-Eye. "That dark witch isn't someone ordinary people can handle. If we encounter her, we're doomed." "You coward!" Mad-Eye snapped, his temper flaring. "No one forced you to be here, Mungdons." Sirius cast a cold glance at Mungdons. "Oh, I'm just reminding you not to ignore reality," Mungdons replied, sounding aggrieved. "Most of Cleona's power is contained in her staff," Atticus explained kindly. "And the staff is still secured in my office, so even if you encounter her, there's no need to worry. By the way," Atticus turned to Severus, "have you seen her?" "She seems to be under house arrest," Severus replied, shaking his head gloomily. Lucius mentioned she angered the Dark Lord somehow. "Under house arrest." Atticus shook his head, puzzled. "About Harry," Sirius interjected eagerly, shifting the topic. "Have you made any progress, Atticus? Honestly, we're all at a loss right now. We don't even know what kind of trouble Harry's gotten into." This was a pressing concern for the Order of the Phoenix members. However, Atticus couldn't divulge too much. It wasn't a matter of trust or secrecy, but rather one of position. While they were united against Voldemort, their views on the Ministry of Magic might not align with his. "Don't worry too much, Sirius," Atticus said, taking a deep breath as he prepared to conclude the meeting. "Harry won't fall victim to the Ministry of Magic's dirty political games. Just be patient." End of this chapter. Chapter 1110. 3 Letters. Nothing could be worse for Harry than Professor Blaine arriving at Grimmauld Place and refusing to even meet him. His entire future depended on Blaine, yet the professor seemed utterly indifferent. This indifference left Harry in a state of anxiety as the trial loomed closer. Despite Hermione's persistent efforts to persuade him to share his strange dreams with Professor Blaine, Harry remained resolute in his silence. Harry had considered confiding in his godfather, Sirius, but since the last Order of the Phoenix meeting, Sirius had been preoccupied. He was often away for days, and when he did return, it was only to urge Harry to stay home and not worry about the trial. This lack of support made Harry reluctant to share his secrets with Sirius. The absence of information only heightened his fear of being sentenced to life in Azkaban, yet he refused to show his anxiety to Hermione and Ron. He even avoided their company. Ginny and Hermione seemed to have discussed something, as Hermione showed increased concern about his dreams. She tried to extract more information from him indirectly, but Harry, weary of her attempts, simply assured her that the dreams had ceased. In truth, the long corridors and closed doors continued to haunt him nightly, causing his scar to throb. On the eve of the trial, several Hogwarts students gathered in Harry and Ron's dormitory. The room was far shabbier than when they first moved in. Their large suitcases lay open on the floor, contents strewn about. Piles of Muggle newspapers were stacked against the wall near the window, remnants of their attempts to understand the increasingly alien Muggle world. Professor Blaine's initial skepticism about Hermione's plan to prove Harry's innocence seemed justified, as the newspapers offered little help. The window was open, and Hedwig circled low in the moonlit sky. Harry watched her flight with a vacant expression, struggling to reconcile the fact that just last month he was competing in the Triwizard Tournament. Now, he faced the prospect of battling Dementors. "Relax, Harry," Hermione said softly under the dim light, trying to lift his spirits. "This will be over tomorrow, and then we can celebrate your birthday." Harry had completely forgotten about his birthday. "I'm not sure the Dementors would approve of a birthday party in Azkaban," he replied flatly. The oppressive atmosphere left everyone unsure of how to comfort him. After all, the Ministry of Magic had charged Harry with murder, a heavy burden for anyone. "Don't worry, Harry," Fred said with a grin. "If Professor Blaine loses to the Minister of Magic, we'll team up with the PE students to break you out of Azkaban." "Great idea, Fred," George chimed in. "If you know who can do it, why can't we? The Ministry won't know what hit them." Ron stifled a laugh, but Hermione's stern look quickly silenced him. The night ended with Fred and George's awkward attempt at humor. Harry barely slept that night. The fear of losing his defense tormented him, and he dreaded the strange dreams that might come. He was also frustrated that Sirius and the others hadn't returned, even with the trial imminent. His mind was a tangled web of thoughts, preventing any chance of rest. It felt as if I had sunk into a dark abyss, overwhelmed by a suffocating sensation. Once again, I found myself in that dim corridor. The black door at the end drew Harry's attention like a whirlpool, consuming everything in its path. An inexplicable desire surged within him, stronger than anything he had ever felt before. He longed for something behind that door, yet he had no idea what it was. A voice called out to Harry, echoing as if from behind layers of water, as though it came from another world. It was familiar and urgent, but Harry was reluctant to heed it. The desire to uncover what lay beyond the door consumed his thoughts. The voice grew louder, shaking the corridor and causing his vision to blur with double images. "Harry, you must wake up." The voice pierced through some unseen barrier, suddenly becoming clear. The world around him seemed to quake, as if everything was collapsing. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. It was as if he had been pulled from the depths of water. Harry sat up in bed, gasping for air, his eyes struggling to adjust to the light. "What's going on? Were you having a nightmare?" The voice, slightly surprised, continued. "There's no time, Harry. You need to get up quickly." "Am I going to be late?" Harry asked, not questioning why Sirius, who had been absent for days, was suddenly there. His mind cleared, and a tingling sensation spread across his scalp. "That's not it, but something unexpected has happened." Before Harry could inquire further, Sirius turned to Ron, who was still hiding under his quilt. "And you, Ron, get up!" Sirius shouted, yanking the blanket away. "Why, Sirius?" Ron sat up, bewildered. "Do I need to see Harry off too?" "I'm afraid it's a bit more complicated than that, Ron," Sirius replied sternly. Without giving Harry and Ron a chance to change, he ushered them out of the bedroom in their dressing gowns. "Head to the kitchen first. There are things we need to confirm," he said in response to Harry's questioning look. As they descended to the second floor, they encountered Tonks and Hermione, who were also groggy. Like Sirius, Tonks wore a serious expression. Ron yawned. "Do we need to go to the Ministry together?" Seeing Ron's confusion, Sirius smirked slightly. "Yes, you need to go to the Ministry with Harry." "Then you should at least give me a heads up," Ron yawned again. Hermione, not her usual alert self, had a strand of hair in her mouth and looked dazed. "I want to wash my hair," she mumbled. "Otherwise, I can't face anyone." "We'll deal with that later, Hermione," Sirius said, a few lines of frustration appearing on his forehead. The three of them followed Sirius downstairs to the basement kitchen. Upon entering, they were jolted awake by the sight before them. In addition to Sirius and Remus, Ron's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, were present. Amelia, Remus, Alastor, Kingsley, and most of the Order of the Phoenix members were gathered there. Harry knew they weren't there just to escort him to the Ministry of Magic, especially seeing the distressed expressions on Mr. and Mrs. Weasley's faces. "What happened, Mrs. Weasley?" Harry asked, his voice trembling with each syllable. Just half an hour ago, Sirius began, his tone heavy and solemn, addressing not only Harry but also Hermione and Ron. The Ministry of Magic sent 3 notification letters specifying the exact time for tomorrow's interrogation. Harry's mind went blank for a moment before he processed the information. 3? He echoed, bewildered. Remus gazed solemnly at Hermione and Ron, whose expressions were growing increasingly bewildered. That's correct, he said. The Ministry of Magic insists that both of you be questioned together. How do you feel about this? End of chapter. Chapter 11. The decision has been made. For a moment, Harry thought Sirius was joking to ease the tension. But the way Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were staring at them told a different story. There was a mix of heartache and anger in their eyes, disbelief mingled with hesitation. No actor, no matter how skilled, could fake such genuine emotions. This is a joke, right? Ron's voice was hollow, as if the nightmare-like reality had drained his soul. His expression was vacant, his eyes empty. This must be an April Fool's joke. Hermione, meanwhile, covered her mouth, her thin frame trembling slightly beneath her dressing gown. She stared at Remus, the candlelight flickering in the crystal tears that trembled in her brown eyes. Harry turned to look at his 2 friends, feeling lost. As the hearing date approached, he had to admit he was gradually losing his grip on reality. Terrible, despicable thoughts crept into his mind unbidden. Why wasn't Hermione or Ron the one targeted by the Ministry of Magic? One was a celebrated Triwizard Tournament champion, the other a descendant of the ancient Weasley family. But when his wish seemed to come true, he found no joy in it. Ron and Hermione were his best friends at Hogwarts. He hoped their friendship would endure like that of his father, mother, Sirius, and Remus, lasting even beyond graduation. But he certainly didn't want them to become cellmates in Azkaban. "Do you 3 have any clues?" Remus asked, his face heavy with concern. He could tell from their expressions what was happening, but he still needed to ask. Unless the Minister of Magic has lost his mind, he must have something significant to implicate you 3. If it's at Hogwarts, when you're involved in some adventure, Sirius, who was supposed to believe in him unconditionally, was also questioning him. This made Harry's heart sink into an icy abyss. He wanted to defend himself, Hermione, and Ron, but his voice seemed magically bound. His lips moved, but no words came out. "We do not have," Hermione screamed, finally breaking down into sobs. "We didn't. We broke the law. Killed people. No." "It's not murder, Hermione," Remus interjected, as if just remembering something. He hurried back to the long table, picking up the 3 letters Harry had ignored. After quickly unfolding them, he frowned and said, "Hermione and Ron, the letter the Ministry sent you only mentions a violation of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy." Remus handed their respective letters to Hermione and Ron. When it was Harry's turn, he spoke solemnly. "As for you, Harry, yours states under prosecution by the Wizengamot for Muggle murder." Harry's face went pale, his movements slow and rusty. "Dear Mr. Potter, the Ministry of Magic now has detailed evidence linking you to a Muggle death in London. As a result, formal proceedings will be initiated against you by the Ministry of Magic, and you have been expelled from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please report to the Ministry of Magic for trial before 7:20 on July 7th, when all the wizards in the Wizengamot Tribunal will hear your defense. I wish you good health. Yours faithfully, Mafalda Hopkirk." It felt as if the air around him had been sucked out, leaving Harry dizzy and suffocating. Tonks supported Hermione, who seemed on the verge of fainting. "Think carefully, the 3 of you," Tonks urged. "Is there anything you might have missed? This is extremely crucial." Hermione's face was as pale as snow, and she shook her head slightly. "No. Oh, I don't know. I can't remember anything. Oh, I was fired. Woohoo." Harry sincerely hoped that Hermione would remember something, anything, that could help them, could always remember something. After all, she was the brightest among them. However, he couldn't fault Hermione for her breakdown. Before today, her greatest fear was being expelled from Hogwarts. But now, she faced the terrifying prospect of being sent to Azkaban. Sirius's gray eyes blazed with anger, and Harry could see he was struggling to contain it. He longed to hear what Sirius was saying, but his ears were overwhelmed with the chaos around him. It was only at this moment that Harry truly understood. Many times, They had watched Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine chatting and laughing with influential figures from the Ministry of Magic. They had listened with delight as Sirius, Remus, Mrs. Weasley, and other adults criticized the foolish Fudge, even joining in the scolding themselves. Yet, they had completely overlooked the fact that, despite the Ministry's stupidity and absurdity, its officials were not opponents they could easily challenge. Hopkirk used to work in the Office for the Prohibition of the Abuse of Magic. Kingsley's voice remained steady amidst the panic in the kitchen. But just yesterday afternoon, he was transferred to the Senior Undersecretary's office by Umbridge. Additionally, the Ministry sent notification letters to Ron and Hermione. Kingsley frowned as he addressed Harry. Could it be that you were involved in some mischief without realizing it? Did you ever use Fred and George's inventions to play tricks on Muggles? Mr. Weasley asked, looking more serious than Harry had ever seen him. No, Dad, Ron replied, his expression vacant. I swear we didn't torment Muggles. Suddenly, a silver phoenix appeared in the kitchen, standing before them. It was Professor Dumbledore's Patronus. Harry was taken aback, and Ron's previously hollow eyes now showed a glimmer of hope. Hermione, tears streaming down her face, looked at the phoenix as if pleading for help. Observing their expressions, Dumbledore sighed inwardly. You still have no idea, do you? The three shook their heads, and Sirius snorted in frustration. What can we expect them to remember at this time? Besides, Fudge is clearly framing us. Hermione began, her voice choked with tears as she gazed into the phoenix's blue eyes. Are we expelled, Professor Dumbledore? Not yet, Miss Granger, Dumbledore replied calmly. Although Cornelius wishes to exert more control over Hogwarts, the authority to expel students still lies with the headmaster unless he can truly prove your guilt. Albus, Mrs. Weasley interjected for the first time that night, her eyes glistening with tears. She spoke in an almost pleading tone. Help them. You can persuade the minister to withdraw the charges. They're just 3 children. The phoenix blinked, and Harry thought he saw a flicker of fire in Dumbledore's blue eyes. Just then, a tapping sound came from outside the door. Sirius vanished from sight for 20 seconds, and when he returned, he held a letter in his hand. Atticus has received the message, and the owl has brought his reply, Sirius announced, waving the letter for everyone to see before opening it. The others quickly leaned in to read. Send Ron and Hermione to stand trial as requested by the Ministry. Don't worry about the rest. I will handle it, Sirius read aloud. The confidence in the brief message seemed to steady the breathing of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. What do you think, Albus? About us? Remus asked, looking at the phoenix with hesitation. Harry, Ron, and Hermione also turned their eyes to the phoenix, feeling a renewed sense of hope. We have no reason not to trust Atticus, Dumbledore concluded. Mrs. Weasley concluded with a firm nod. I'll go and iron your best clothes so you can wear them tomorrow morning, and don't forget to wash your hair thoroughly before you leave, she advised, her voice tinged with both care and insistence. She paused, sniffing hard, and then offered Ron, Harry, and Hermione a smile that was both warm and slightly tearful. A good first impression can work wonders. End of this chapter. Chapter 11-12, Welcome. In the quiet morning, the rising sun cast a distorted and hazy outline on the horizon. Wisps of green smoke curled from the chimneys embedded in the walls of the new building at the Haas orphanage, dissipating into the sky still shrouded in the remnants of night. Won't you stay a few more days before leaving? Mrs. Reagan asked, her warm smile illuminated by the dawn. She was reluctant to see Atticus Blaine depart. You've been coming and going so quickly these past 2 years, Atticus. The children all hope you can stay here longer. I'm sorry, Mrs. Reagan. I'd love to take a long vacation, too, Atticus replied, shrugging his shoulders with a helpless smile. But the company is expanding rapidly. The sudden increase in business volume is overwhelming. I believe this is only temporary. Mrs. Reagan looked at the young man's thin face with concern. She wanted to urge him to rest more and not to bear so much pressure, but she swallowed her words. Mr. Lawrence, Mrs. Reagan turned her gaze to Lawrence, who wore a bowler hat and a neat gray-black suit. She, too, was reluctant to see him leave. It's a bad day for the kids. They'll be sad when they wake up and find you and Atticus gone. I'm just as sad to leave, Mrs. Reagan, Lawrence replied sincerely. He glanced quickly at Atticus, then turned his gaze back to her and assured, "I'll come back once the trouble is resolved, as long as you don't find my presence burdensome." "Oh, you've been so helpful," Mrs. Reagan said with both emotion and gratitude. Before stepping out of the large iron gate of the yard, Lawrence glanced at the Tudor roses in the flower bed, bathed in the morning sun. He sighed with emotion, then followed Atticus out of the orphanage. There were few pedestrians on the street outside. Occasionally, merchants preparing for the day's business or delivery men with milk and newspapers could be seen. These muggles knew Atticus and Mr. Lawrence, the kind-hearted men who generously donated to the Haas orphanage. They greeted them with good mornings, nodding and smiling. Atticus and Lawrence responded politely. "My assurance to Mrs. Reagan," Lawrence began, turning the corner and leaving the street in front of the orphanage. He suddenly removed his hat, nervously smoothing his graying temples, and looked at Atticus with unease. "Can you deliver, Atticus?" "There's nothing to worry about, Lawrence," Atticus replied, unaffected by the message he received the previous night. He seemed like a traveler with a suitcase, ready for vacation, exuding relief and joy. "I promise to bring you back safely from the wizard's court." Lawrence walked forward silently, still deeply worried. It wasn't that he doubted Atticus's assurances or feared for his own safety. Although he knew little about the wizarding world, he understood there was a significant conspiracy behind the scene he witnessed. Atticus had confessed this to him. High-ranking wizarding officials were attempting to use a man-made tragedy to further some conspiracy. Atticus had sought him out to expose it, which meant opposing the wizarding government. Lawrence glanced at Atticus's carefree profile. The government of a country undoubtedly held considerable power. Wouldn't Atticus be implicated if he opposed the government that governed wizards? "Atticus?" After hesitating for a long time, Lawrence asked softly, "Are we the only two defending that kid? Is it necessary?" "In fact, we have a lot of supporters, Lawrence," Atticus replied, seemingly unaware of the old butler's worries. Atticus Blaine smiled and said, "We don't need too many people to give us a boost. You don't understand. The wizarding world is actually quite a reasonable place." "A reasonable place?" Lawrence grew even more concerned. His life experience had taught him that no place in this world was entirely lawful, unless the magical world created by wizards was akin to a fairy tale kingdom. "Is it?" Lawrence pondered for a moment before deciding to caution the young master, who seemed to lack life experience. "When the master was alive, I dealt with many officials and judges. To be honest, sometimes the law isn't held in such high regard by those people. Of course, as you said, I don't understand the magical world." "In fact, wizards don't put much faith in the law either," Atticus chuckled. "But they do respect the fist more." "The fist?" Lawrence was taken aback. "Ah, the bus is here. We're lucky we didn't have to wait too long. I remember when I lived here, buses were like true love, always taking forever to arrive," Atticus said cheerfully, helping Lawrence onto the empty bus. "Are we taking the bus to the, wizarding government residence?" Lawrence asked after a long silence. "I thought wizards would use more fantastical ways of traveling." "Oh, we might have to take the subway later." "You're right, wizards do have some means to reach their destinations faster," Atticus replied with a smile. "But those methods might be too stimulating for you. Considering I need you to keep a clear mind and good physical condition today, it's best not to take risks. Muggle travel, ordinary people's travel methods, are safer for you." Lawrence took a deep breath, nodded, and said nothing more. The young master didn't seem like a reckless youth. He should be prepared for any possible situations. Lawrence reassured himself that since the young master had asked for help, he had to do his best to assist, regardless of the danger. After a 20-minute bus ride, they took the subway. Trying Muggle transportation didn't provide Atticus with a particularly pleasant experience. As the subway approached the city center, more and more young people commuting to work filled the carriages until they were packed shoulder to shoulder. Even Lawrence found it difficult to adapt to the crowded conditions. "I thought we were heading to the suburbs?" Lawrence remarked with surprise as they squeezed out of the subway station and stood on the main street in central London, trying to smooth the wrinkles on his suit. When the Ministry of Magic was first established, it was located in a less prosperous area. Atticus explained, as he led Lawrence across the street and into a deserted alley where the red telephone booth marking the entrance to the Ministry of Magic stood. But wizards didn't anticipate that Muggle cities would expand so quickly. Atticus, having just entered the alley, narrowed his eyes at the reporters lined up in front of the telephone booth, cameras in hand, waiting to enter. He quickly stepped back outside. "What's wrong, Atticus?" Lawrence asked, his nerves heightened by Atticus's unusual behavior. "To avoid unnecessary trouble," Atticus mused, "it's better to act before you're needed, or else others might discover your presence. Oh, and I should avoid being noticed by these reporters. They won't let me go easily." With that, Atticus drew his wand and gently tapped Lawrence's shoulder while the Muggles around them remained oblivious. He then did the same to himself. "Oh, this is me!" Lawrence exclaimed, his eyes widening in astonishment. Atticus Blaine glanced out the glass window beside him. "We're invisible, Master. Is this magic too?" "I've told you. Just call me Atticus. Yes, this is magic. Invisibility isn't a difficult feat for wizards." Lawrence's eyes darted around, unable to locate Atticus after he vanished. Atticus gently grasped the old butler's arm, guiding him back into the alley. "Amazing!" Lawrence exclaimed. Although it wasn't the first time he'd witnessed Atticus perform magic, he still felt a profound sense of awe. Compared to wizards, we are so clumsy. "That might not be entirely true," Atticus replied, waving his wand. A sudden gust of wind scattered the reporters who were lined up, allowing him and Lawrence to slip ahead. Muggles can also use technology to achieve incredible things. Look, the elevator at the entrance of the Ministry of Magic was inspired by Muggle inventions. Here we are. With a hum, the world momentarily plunged into darkness before light returned to Lawrence's eyes. He could hear the buzzing of countless conversations around him, but that was no longer important. "Welcome to the world of magic, Lawrence," Atticus said with a smile, observing Lawrence's astonishment at the grandeur of the Golden Magic Hall and the throngs of people dressed in peculiar and fantastical attire. End of this chapter. Chapter 1113, An Unprecedented Gathering. Dumbledore. Has anyone seen Dumbledore? The reception hall of the Ministry of Magic was filled with a cacophony of voices. A wizard, who appeared to hail from Vagato, stood on his toes, shouting to his companions near the elevator hall, "Harry Potter is on trial. Surely the headmaster of Hogwarts would attend, if only we could interview him beforehand." "And Atticus Blaine," others echoed, calling out for Atticus. "It's rumored he'll be defending Potter at the trial. Has anyone spotted him?" Breaking news. Breaking news. A group of reporters spilled out of the elevator, their voices rising above the din. From Madame Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary of State, comes the announcement. Today, the Wizengamot will also try Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley for breaching the International Statute of Wizarding's secrecy, alongside Harry Potter. The hall erupted as if a bomb had detonated. Reporters, eyes alight with fervor, shouted in excitement. "Who are Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley?" A wizard unfamiliar with the European magical community inquired, earning disdainful looks from his peers. "Hermione Granger was the second champion for Hogwarts in the Triwizard Tournament," someone explained. "Ron Weasley was her chosen assistant in the final round. He's from the Weasley family, one of the Sacred 28. This is a massive political conflict," a Daily Prophet reporter exclaimed, nearly breathless with excitement. "The Ministry of Magic has declared open war on Hogwarts. Can Dumbledore and Blaine withstand the pressure? Merlin, I can't wait to see how this trial unfolds." Names like Albus Dumbledore, Atticus Blaine, Cornelius Fudge, Dolores Umbridge, Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley were on everyone's lips, repeated over and over. In the midst of the chaos, Lawrence, led by Atticus, struggled to navigate through the throng. He was taken aback by the presence of reporters in the magical world, and the constant mention of these renowned wizards left him in awe. The elevators were nearly paralyzed, with call boxes dismantled by frenzied reporters. "This won't do," Atticus muttered. Each time an elevator arrived, the reporters surged forward, leaving no chance for Atticus to slip in. With a flick of his wand, a silver flying snake darted away, vanishing into the elevator shaft. "I've called for help. Just wait a moment," Atticus assured, though Lawrence could barely see his face. Swallowing nervously, Lawrence nodded. Despite his mental preparation, the reality of the magical world left him speechless. He was astounded by the sheer number of people with extraordinary abilities and by young Master Blaine's significant role in the magical community, surpassing even his father's fame in London's business circles. After about 10 minutes, several elevators descended simultaneously. A contingent of stern-faced aurors surged forward, herding the reporters out of the elevator hall and establishing a cordon at the Fountain of Magical Brethren. "Let's go. Headmaster Dumbledore should be in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. We'll head to the second floor underground," Atticus said. The aurors, preoccupied with the protesting reporters, failed to notice Atticus and Lawrence, who were concealed by a disillusionment charm. Seizing the opportunity, Atticus guided Lawrence to the elevator. As the elevator doors closed, Lawrence exhaled deeply, his mind racing with the extraordinary events unfolding around him. Atticus Blaine let out a long breath and wiped the sweat from his temples. Emerging from his hidden state, his violet eyes fixed on Lawrence, who remained in his phantom form. Atticus smiled slightly. "Isn't the wizarding world fascinating?" "Fascinating," Lawrence replied with a bitter smile. "Forgive me, Master Blaine, but this is truly astonishing. I almost feel as if I've landed on another planet." "Heh," Atticus chuckled. "Normally, there wouldn't be so many people around, but you know, word got out that something exciting is happening today." Lawrence shook his head, feeling the lively atmosphere was anything but reassuring. He looked up at Atticus with concern. "I overheard a reporter mention that the wizarding government, the Ministry of Magic, is trying Vernon's nephew and his friends as part of a political conflict." "Atticus," Lawrence pursed his dry lips, "if this isn't resolved properly, could it lead to bloodshed?" "I don't think so, Lawrence," Atticus replied with a faint smile, though there was an unusual gravity in his soft voice. "But some people will certainly find themselves in unfortunate circumstances." Ding. The second level, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, includes the Office for the Prohibition of the Abuse of Magic, the Auror Command, and the Wizengamot Administration. The cold female voice announced the stop as the golden elevator doors slowly opened. Atticus took Lawrence's arm and led him out of the car. "Ah, Headmaster Dumbledore." As they stepped out, Atticus turned to see Dumbledore standing in the corridor, facing the elevator hall. Dumbledore, still in his black traveling cloak, appeared weary. His silver hair and beard were slightly disheveled, and his eyes showed signs of fatigue, as if he hadn't slept all night. Upon seeing Atticus, Dumbledore quickly approached. He nodded to Atticus before his blue eyes settled on Lawrence, revealing a hint of surprise. "And this gentleman is—" Despite his age, Lawrence reacted swiftly, realizing that the man before him was Albus Dumbledore, frequently mentioned by reporters and associated with Atticus. Lawrence's breath caught slightly. Even though he had met many dignitaries in his life, he felt a unique pressure in the presence of this old wizard, who seemed much older than himself. Dumbledore's penetrating gaze seemed to peer into his very soul. "Temele Lawrence," the old butler said cautiously, holding his breath. "It is an honor to meet you, Headmaster Dumbledore." "Ah, hello, Mr. Lawrence." Dumbledore smiled and nodded, his eyes discerning much at a glance. "I suppose the wizarding world has given you quite a few surprises?" "Oh, it's surprising, but I'm trying to get used to it," Lawrence replied, straightening and swallowing. Dumbledore chuckled, then turned his attention to Atticus. "Lawrence witnessed something." Atticus smiled calmly. "It's about Harry, Hermione, and Ron's case." "Is it?" Dumbledore asked quietly, raising an eyebrow slightly. "Forgive my curiosity, Atticus, but how did you come across Mr. Lawrence?" "It's a long story," Atticus replied, shaking his head. "In short, Lawrence is my friend from the Muggle world. After witnessing certain events, he reached out to me, though he didn't know I was a wizard at the time. He shared his concerns, and I followed the clues to uncover the whole story." "I see," Dumbledore said, shaking his head with a sigh. Atticus's explanation was subtle, yet sufficient for Dumbledore to grasp the general truth of the matter. He couldn't decide whether to consider Cornelius too unlucky or Harry too fortunate, given that the Ministry of Magic's despicable actions were discovered by Atticus's acquaintance. "So, what are your plans for today?" Dumbledore asked with a heavy expression after a moment of contemplation. "I assume you've had discussions with Fudge." Another conversation, Headmaster Dumbledore? Atticus Blaine inquired. In the brief silence that followed, Dumbledore appeared even more aged and weary. Connolly has insisted that his undersecretary be appointed as deputy headmaster at Hogwarts. He has also demanded that I immediately suspend the training of the army here, and— Dumbledore sighed heavily once more. Atticus offered a reassuring smile and continued the conversation. And expel me from Hogwarts. So what do you think I'm going to do? He looked at Dumbledore with calm determination. I still hope that the transition process can be as smooth as possible, Dumbledore began, but Atticus interjected. But they've seriously violated the law, haven't they? He cast a sideways glance at the elevator's shroud. Aft. A deafening roar echoed from the dark shaft behind the Golden Gate, and he sensed the magic of Harry and several members of the Order of the Phoenix. Let's go, Headmaster Dumbledore, Atticus urged. It's time to put this matter to rest. End of this chapter. Chapter 11114, Judgment Day, Part 1. Mr. Potter, I'm a reporter from the Daily Prophet. What is your personal opinion on the charges brought against you by the Ministry of Magic? Mr. Potter, I am from France. Can you tell us your purpose in harming an innocent muggle? Was this a premeditated murder, or do you find it amusing? What role did Mr. Weasley and Miss Granger play in this murder? Were they your accomplices? As a legendary figure who defeated the mysterious man, how do you feel about your current situation? Say something, Mr. Potter. How do you intend to defend yourself? Amidst the excited roars and nearly frenzied faces, Harry and his two companions, escorted by the Order of the Phoenix, struggled through the throng of reporters and the Auror blockade at the Fountain of Magical Brotherhood. They finally reached the elevator hall. Harry! 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 Sirius's face flickered before Harry's eyes, and his voice seemed distant. Don't be intimidated by these reporters, you three. They're just here for the spectacle. Under the guidance of the Auror, the group entered the elevator reserved for them. Ding! The elevator doors closed, and Sirius, with a livid expression, immediately shouted. But whether it was Harry, Ron, or Hermione, the three young wizards now accused seemed petrified. They stared blankly at Sirius, unable to speak. This won't do, you three. Remus looked anxious. You must stay clear-headed and answer every question the Wizengamot Judgment Committee asks you accurately. Don't say anything unnecessary, Kingsley advised. Don't be afraid. You have to believe in your innocence. Professor Moody yelled, and every member of the Order of the Phoenix offered advice, but Harry didn't hear any of it. Murder. How could the Ministry of Magic accuse him of such a heinous crime? Don't worry, Ron. Mr. Weasley, extremely anxious, shook Ron's shoulders. Your mother and I believe you haven't done anything foolish. Fudge and Dolores can't harm you. Atticus and Dumbledore will be at the trial to defend you. Dumbledore has most of the Order of the Phoenix on standby, kids. Professor Moody spat at Harry and the others again. We won't sit idly by and let the Minister of Magic do as he pleases. If necessary, we won't hesitate to use force. This statement unexpectedly worked. Harry's eyes lit up, and he nodded slightly. In Harry's perception, time seemed distorted, and the transition of spatial scenes felt off. He only remembered sitting in a red telephone booth, entering the grand hall of the Ministry of Magic, and then, in what felt like a second later, standing before a large, rusty iron door. Ron and Hermione were still by his side, but when he turned around, Sirius and the others had vanished, leaving only the somber-faced Kingsley with them. Go on in, the three of you. Kingsley, usually calm, now showed obvious worry. He pointed at the iron door before them. It's inside, but I can't go in. Harry nodded numbly and touched the cold iron handle. As he opened the door, a cold, fishy smell hit him, making him shudder. The sounds around him became real, no longer ethereal. He turned to look at his two good friends again. The despair on Ron's face was unbearable, while Hermione seemed slightly more awake for some reason. When she saw Harry looking at her, she said nothing, offering only a sad smile. The walls of the courtroom were made of black stone, and the light from the torches cast flickering shadows across the room. The courtroom was dim and eerie. As the three of them entered in a disorganized line, they found the scene inside to be quite unexpected. Harry had anticipated being met by the dignified gazes of numerous witches and wizards. Indeed, about 50 wizards in purple robes each with an exquisite silver W embroidered on the left chest, were seated on tiered benches. However, their attention was focused on two individuals on the verge of confrontation in the courtroom, while a few glanced skyward in fear. "I still stand by my opinion, Connolly," declared the witch in the midst of the argument. It was Amelia Bones, whom Harry and his companions had seen at the Triwizard Tournament. Her name had been mentioned by various people, and her reputation seemed to surpass that of the entire Ministry of Magic. There is no clause in the interrogation regulations set by the Wizengamot administration that permits the use of dementors during interrogations. The mention of dementors sent a chill through Harry, and even Ron seemed to struggle for breath. Was the Ministry of Magic planning to torture a confession in public? "You're taking my words out of context, Amelia. I never said I was going to use dementors," retorted Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic, whom Harry had grown to despise. "The dementors are here only to prevent any unexpected situations." "Unexpected situations!" Amelia shouted, her voice filled with anger. "I fail to see what kind of accident could justify this. You summoned the dementors and insisted that wizards involved in the interrogation be unarmed. I don't need to ask what law you're basing this on, but have you considered the prison break in Azkaban last month? We lost the contract that controlled the dementors, and they may no longer be loyal to the Ministry." "That's nonsense." Fudge's face contorted with rage, as if he were ready to lash out. "Dementors always follow the orders of the Minister of Magic." "Dementors," Harry muttered unconsciously, caught in the heated exchange between Amelia and Fudge. "Up there, Harry." Ron finally managed to speak, his voice as faint as a whisper. Harry looked up, and the chill that gripped his heart nearly froze his soul. Dementors indeed. There were so many that Harry couldn't distinguish one from another. These ghostly figures moved silently beneath the high dome, almost merging with the darkness. Harry surmised that the reason the Dementors had no effect on the wizards in the courtroom was due to a dark, glowing film under the dome that blocked them. Looking down again, Harry noticed the heavy security in the courtroom. In nearly every inconspicuous corner stood an auror with a stern expression, clearly authorized to carry wands. The focus of these aurors' watchful eyes was the two composed wizards seated at the front of the trial bench, Professor Dumbledore and Professor Atticus Blaine. Harry's frozen thoughts began to thaw. Like most members of the Wizengamot, Professors Blaine and Dumbledore were observing the argument between Amelia and Fudge. Yet, unlike the others, their expressions remained calm, seemingly unaware that the stringent security measures were directed at them. Suddenly, a wizard familiar to Harry stood up. It was Ludo Bagman. He was the first to notice the trio's entrance. Ludo, unfazed by the fact that Harry and his friends were suspects, smiled warmly at them and carefully maneuvered past the other wizards. In front of him, Atticus Blaine and Dumbledore stood, engaged in a hushed conversation. A witch, who had been lurking in the shadows near Fudge, approached them, whispering and gesturing towards the trio. To the disappointment of Harry and his companions, neither Professor Dumbledore nor Professor Blaine spared them a glance. "Minister," the witch said, stepping forward. Her gaze lingered on Hermione, her toad-like eyes gleaming with a peculiar satisfaction. In a voice that was both chilling and delicate, she announced, "The three defendants are here. Shall we begin?" A murmur of movement swept through the chamber as the members of the Wizengamot tribunal shifted in their seats, casting heavy, judgmental looks at Harry and his friends. The only exceptions were Atticus Blaine and Dumbledore, who continued their discussion, seemingly oblivious to the proceedings. A wave of resentment surged within Harry. The last time he had seen Professor Blaine was over 20 days ago when he was brought to Grimmauld Place from the Dursleys' house. Since then, Blaine had not spoken a word to him. "You are here," Cornelius Fudge said, dismissing Amelia's presence. He cast a final glance at Atticus Blaine and Dumbledore, who remained steadfast and unyielding. Taking a deep breath, Fudge turned his cold gaze to the three young wizards, who stood silently before him. He pointed to the three chained chairs positioned in the center of the room. "Go sit over there." End of this chapter. Chapter 111-15, Judgment Day, Part 2. Harry and his companions turned their attention to the center of the courtroom. There, 3 handrails stood ominously, wrapped in iron chains that seemed to slither like venomous snakes. At the sound of Fudge's voice, the padlocks on the chains lifted and swayed menacingly in the air. Harry heard Hermione scream again, but he didn't turn back. He trudged forward, his mind preoccupied with the cold indifference displayed by Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine. Fortunately, when the 3 of them sat down, the chains merely clanked threateningly, but did not bind them. From their position, they faced Professor Dumbledore and Professor Blaine, who were seated on stools at the front. Hermione and Ron cast pleading looks in their direction, but the professors continued their conversation, seemingly oblivious. Dumbledore cast a cryptic glance at the Dementor hovering above, then looked at Atticus Blaine, who merely blinked and shook his head, offering no insight. Harry abandoned any hope of gleaning inspiration from the professors and turned his gaze to the Minister of Magic on the podium. Cornelius Fudge, a rotund man typically seen in a dark yellow-green bowler hat, was hatless today. The kind, benevolent smile Harry remembered from 2 years ago, when Fudge had found him after the incident with his aunt, was gone. In its place was a chilling coldness. Miss Amelia Bones, who had just been arguing with Fudge, sat beside him, her monocle glinting ominously in the light. Fudge signaled to someone in the shadows, and Harry was startled to see Dawlish, the Auror who had once tried to take him from the Dursleys, emerge with his wand in hand. Dawlish's head was still wrapped in a thick bandage. He positioned himself behind the 3 stone chairs, standing guard over Harry, with a look of disdain directed at Atticus Blaine. For the first time, Atticus directed his gaze towards Harry. He glanced over Harry's head at Dawlish with indifference, then turned slightly to face Fudge on the judgment stand with calm composure. "Well, let's begin," Fudge announced, his voice booming as he addressed the members of the Wizengamot. "The trial will be held on July 20th for the trial of Harry James Potter, Ronald Bilious Weasley, and Hermione Jane Granger for violating the Reasonable Restraint of Underage Wizards Act and the International Statute of Secrecy." Fudge leaned forward, casting a grotesque shadow with his massive frame. Interrogators: Cornelius Oswald Fudge, Minister for Magic; Amelia Susan Bones, Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement; Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Under Minister. Witness for the defense: Atticus Blaine. Under the astonished gazes of Harry and his friends, Atticus Blaine stood and strode confidently towards the 3 chairs in the courtroom's center. Ignoring Dawlish's concealed apprehension, he approached Hermione, seated on the far left. The members of the Wizengamot whispered among themselves, some casting glances at Dumbledore, who remained composed. Atticus ignored the murmurs and focused solely on Fudge, whose face was flushed crimson. "Very good," Fudge said, taking a deep breath and speaking through gritted teeth. "So let's start. Now the accusation." Fudge retrieved a piece of parchment from his pocket and adjusted his glasses. "The charges brought by the Ministry of Magic are that all 3 defendants violated Article 13 of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy and the law on reasonable restraint of underage wizards. Among them, Harry James Potter's illegal actions were severe and directly resulted in the death of a Muggle," Fudge declared, his eyes peering over the edge of the parchment to focus on the 3 bewildered young wizards before him. "What defense do you have against the charges brought by the Ministry of Magic?" Defense. Harry found the notion absurd. Up to this point, the Ministry had failed to clearly explain what he had supposedly done. Not only were the 3 young wizards on trial confused, but many members of the Wizengamot also wore puzzled expressions. Madame Bones glanced sideways at the parchment in Fudge's hand, adjusted her monocle, and remained silent for the moment. "We don't know," Ron's voice trembled violently. He looked up at the Minister of Magic, his face ashen and devoid of color. "We don't know what we've done." "Is that so?" Fudge's expression was stern. "Are you 3 refusing to plead guilty?" The question was problematic, and the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Ding! It wasn't Cornelius Fudge who restored order. Atticus Blaine raised his hand from the armrest of the stone chair where Hermione was seated, flicking the protruding chain with his fingers. The crisp sound immediately silenced the murmurs, and Dawlish, standing a few steps away, raised his wand nervously, wary of Blaine. "I think many have noticed," Blaine said gently, that the minister is attempting to use vague language to pin unfounded charges on 3 innocent students. Oh, a false charge? Umbridge stood up behind Fudge, her smile insincere as she stared at Blaine with her round, indifferent eyes. I must have misunderstood you, Professor Blaine. Are you suggesting that the Ministry of Magic is framing these 3 students? Blaine stepped away from Hermione's side and stood in front of the 3 children, facing the Wizengamot. Despite his gentle demeanor, many members of the Wizengamot shrank back, some even exchanging glances behind Dumbledore's back. I believe, Blaine continued, ignoring Umbridge and focusing on Fudge's sinister expression, that all witches and wizards, including the Wizengamot, should question whether the Ministry's prosecution of Harry James Potter, Ronald Bilious Weasley, and Hermione Jean Granger is based on genuine evidence. Of course, the Ministry has evidence, Blaine. Fudge replied loudly, his voice brimming with pride. He never intended to convict the 3 students without evidence. His focus was on challenging Blaine, or perhaps Dumbledore. The 3 defendants. Fudge's expression shifted from contemptuous to stern and authoritative. Do you admit to purchasing goods from Honeyduke's, a confectionery shop in Hogsmeade, on the 27th of January this year? Honeyduke's candy store? What relevance did it have to the case? The courtroom buzzed with renewed whispers, and Dumbledore, seated in the front row, deep in thought, frowned slightly. Harry and the others' panicked expressions turned blank at the question. Harry and Ron looked confused, while Hermione was deep in thought. Do the 3 defendants admit it? Fudge's voice echoed again, and Harry blurted out, Sorry, I can't remember. Honeyduke's candy store. Harry took a few breaths. We've been there many times. Every time Hogsmeade is open to students, many students visit, but we can't remember. Oh, you can't remember? Fudge smiled coldly, casting a provocative glance at the calm Blaine. I have evidence to prove it. Dawlish? Dawlish, seated behind Harry's chair, straightened his posture, a blush rising to his cheeks. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, he dashed out of the courtroom at a sprint, returning 2 minutes later, panting heavily. Behind him followed a broad-shouldered, bald young man. As he entered, the room buzzed with anticipation. Chairs scraped against the floor as the jury members rose, each craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the newcomer. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged bewildered glances, their curiosity piqued by this unexpected witness from the Ministry of Magic. What is the identity of the witness? Ms. Bones inquired with a grave tone. Hello, members of the Wizengamot, the minister, and. The young bald man, visibly nervous and perspiring, stood trembling beside Atticus Blaine. He avoided making eye contact with Atticus and Albus Dumbledore, who observed the proceedings with a stern expression. Instead, he hunched his shoulders, trying to make himself smaller. I'm Ambrosio Froom, owner of Honeyduke's candy shop in Hogsmeade, he finally managed to say, his voice barely of a whisper. End of this chapter. Chapter 111-16, Judgment Day. Ambrosio Froom and his wife owned a renowned candy store in Hogsmeade Village, beloved by young wizards throughout the magical world. Harry and his friends were frequent visitors, not only for the sweets, but also because the shop's storeroom concealed a secret passage leading to the 4th floor of Hogwarts' main castle. This passage was a well-kept secret among them and the mischievous Fred and George. Well, Mr. Froom, Fudge addressed the witness with a congenial demeanor. Please inform the members of the Wizengamot jury whether you recognize the 3 defendants seated behind you. Froom glanced back at Harry, his expression tinged with reluctance, yet he nodded affirmatively. Yes, Minister, they are Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger, students at Hogwarts. Like many others, they often visit my shop. The courtroom remained silent, with Ms. Bones scrutinizing Froom intently. Mr. Froom, do you recall the visit of the 3 defendants to your shop on January 27th of this year? Fudge inquired. Yes, I remember, Froom replied, leaning slightly toward Fudge. Mr. Froom, Ms. Bones interjected, her tone skeptical, your candy store is immensely popular among young wizards, with numerous students visiting on open days. How can you be certain that these 3 defendants visited your store 6 months ago? Harry's mouth opened as forgotten memories began to resurface, while fear flickered in Hermione's brown eyes. She stared at the Honeyduke's owner, as if recalling something significant. Because Mr. Potter was particularly generous that day, Froome explained, his voice slightly breathless. No student has spent so much gold at once this year. He paid a total of 30 gold galleons, 5 silver sickles, and 12 copper nuts. It was a substantial purchase, so I offered him a discount, charging only 30 gold galleons. The Wizengamot jury listened intently, but Harry, Ron, and Hermione felt as if a thunderbolt had struck their minds. They finally remembered their actions that day. Harry's strength seemed to drain away, leaving him slumped against the cold stone chair, despair clouding his green eyes. The Ministry's accusation was not merely about a foolish mistake, it was a serious violation of wizarding law. "How can you substantiate your claim, Mr. Froome?" Amelia Bones asked, casting a quick glance at Atticus Blaine, who stood silently with downcast eyes. A sense of foreboding gripped her, yet she pressed on, seeking any inconsistencies. "I have a sales record," Froome replied eagerly, addressing Dawlish. "I use it for tax filings with the Ministry." Dawlish, in a raspy voice, acknowledged the statement. In full view of the courtroom, he retrieved a thick, weathered account book from his coat. Carefully, he turned to the page dated January 27th, filled with detailed sales records. He offered the book to Fudge, who merely gestured for it to be handed to Ms. Bones. The book, magically stamped with the date, was accepted as evidence by every jury member. "Very well, Mr. Froome," Fudge said, casting a superior glance at Atticus. "You may step down now." "I'm sorry," Froome whispered to Harry, Ron, and Hermione, his face etched with sorrow, before hastily exiting the ominous courtroom. "Now, to the 3 defendants," Fudge's authoritative gaze swept over the trio, their faces pale. "Do you contest the fact that you visited Honeyduke's candy store in Hogsmeade Village on January 27th? The evidence was undeniable, leaving no room for dispute. Harry attempted to speak, but his voice was hoarse, unable to produce a sound. "I thought you might be wondering," Fudge began, his words hanging in the air. Atticus Blaine suddenly raised his voice. "It is perfectly normal for the 3 defendants to patronize Honeyduke's candy store. It does not violate wizarding law. So why did the Ministry of Magic bring charges against them?" The murmurs in the room gradually swelled like waves under the moonlight. "I do expect a reasonable explanation, Connolly," said Miss Bone, her voice cutting through the noise. Dawlish then brought forth another witness, a wizard who appeared to be about 50 years old, thin and visibly uneasy in the imposing interrogation room that upheld the majesty of magical law. "I'm Zadley Kern," the thin, weathered wizard introduced himself respectfully to the assembled members of the Wizengamot. "I am employed by the Wizarding Post Office, Department of Magical Transportation, Ministry of Magic. I serve as a registrar at the Hogsmeade Post Office." "Well, Kern," Fudge's voice softened, "what can you tell us about the 3 defendants?" On January 27th of this year, 3 wizards, Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger, each brought a large package into the post office. They paid the fees and requested that the packages be sent to London. Atticus glanced at the wizard post office clerk, who spoke with practiced fluency, suspecting that this testimony had been rehearsed multiple times. "Be specific," he urged. Amelia Bones, already sensing the direction of the proceedings, sighed inwardly. "Where did they send the package?" she asked. Dawlish, with a grim smile, opened a booklet and announced loudly, "According to the Auror's investigation, Harry James Potter, Ronald Bilious Weasley, and Hermione Jean Granger sent their packages to a Muggle orphanage in London." The courtroom erupted in the greatest commotion since the trial began. Many wizards looked at Harry and his friends in disbelief, while others cast puzzled glances at Dumbledore, seated in the front row. "Donate wizarding items to a Muggle orphanage? Doesn't Hogwarts teach any legal knowledge at all?" Atticus, the focal point of everyone's attention, remained as still as a statue, not uttering a word. Dumbledore also sat quietly, though a barely perceptible hint of helplessness crossed his aged face. "How did the Auror office come to investigate the Wizarding Post Office, Dawlish?" Miss Bones asked coldly, her gaze fixed on Dawlish, who was displaying the post office records to the court. "You will remember, Miss Bones," Dawlish replied, meeting his superior's eyes without hesitation. "The Auror office was ordered to investigate the attack on Hermione Granger in Hogsmeade. We discovered that the cursed package she received was sent from the post office. When we retrieved the post office records, we unexpectedly learned that the three defendants sent a package to the Muggle orphanage in London on the same day. As he spoke, Dawlish's eyes flickered. We immediately realized there might be a risk and rushed to investigate, but when we arrived in London, we found the orphanage had not received the package. Not received? Harry, Ron, and Hermione stared at Dawlish, bewildered about the fate of their packages. After investigation, we found that the packages of the three defendants were taken to a Muggle police station. Allow me to explain that the Muggle police station is where the Muggle Aurors are stationed. The revelation that the packages ended up at the police station instead of the orphanage left Harry wide-eyed with horror. Dawlish turned to face him with a grim expression. Why? Those three parcels sent from the Hogsmeade post office were confiscated by the Muggle Aurors. Oh, we conducted a thorough investigation, Mr. Potter. Do you want to know the answer? Dawlish asked, feigning sadness. Tell everyone, what is the reason? Fudge, ignoring Dawlish and Harry, focused on the silent Dumbledore and Atticus, a sneer playing on his lips, clearly relishing the moment. In an incomparably loud voice, the courtroom resounded with, "Tell the members of the Wizengamot jury about the terrible consequences of Harry Potter's foolish actions." The high-pitched voice of Dawlish, combined with the echo of Fudge's, reverberated through the dimly lit chamber. Adding to the tension was the sharp, impatient urging of Dolores Umbridge, creating an atmosphere where it seemed inevitable that Hogwarts was destined to fail. An innocent Muggle postman, who was raising two children, was tasked with delivering Harry Potter to a Muggle orphanage. Tragically, an accident occurred along the way. A chocolate frog lodged in the poor postman's throat, suffocating him to death. The Muggle Aurors, believing the packages to be crucial evidence in a murder case, confiscated them. Harry Potter. Dawlish glared at Harry, who sat slumped in despair, and shouted angrily, "You killed someone!" The courtroom was struck as if by a bolt of thunder, and the jury members stared at Harry, tears welling in their eyes. They had not anticipated that the Ministry of Magic's prosecution of Harry Potter would hold such weight. Oh, please don't jump to conclusions. Atticus Blaine, reviving from his statue-like stillness, allowed a smile to play at the corner of his mouth. His brisk voice cut through the solemn and quiet courtroom. I do have some questions. End of this chapter. Chapter 11-17, Judgment Day 4. I do have some questions that I hope can be answered, Atticus Blaine said with a smile. As soon as he spoke, the courtroom, which had been as noisy as a bustling city, fell into a sudden silence. Every juror from the Wizengamot fixed their eyes on Atticus Blaine. The thought that Blaine was ready to fight back crossed many minds. This was not surprising. Given the character Blaine had shown in front of others, he would certainly not sit idly by and await his fate. But what was Blaine planning to do? The chain of evidence prepared by the Ministry of Magic seemed airtight, and finding a flaw would not be easy. Moreover, judging by the speechless expressions of the three young wizards in custody at Hogwarts, it seemed the Ministry of Magic had not fabricated the facts. What do you want to ask? Although he had acted arrogantly in front of Harry and the others, Dawlish couldn't help but feel flustered when Blaine's eyes swept over him. After blurting out his question, Dawlish suddenly realized he shouldn't have responded to Blaine so easily. Just now. Atticus withdrew his gaze from Dawlish's face. Under the watchful eyes of all the Wizengamot members, he paced back and forth in front of Harry and the others. Dawlish told the jurors why Harry Potter was charged with murder by the Ministry of Magic. Then I can't help but wonder. Atticus stopped walking and looked at Dawlish again. According to what you said, the Auror office went to the Hogsmeade post office to investigate on or after January 27th of this year, to look for clues in the attack on Miss Hermione Granger. Therefore, it was accidentally discovered that on the 27th, Harry James Potter, Ronald Bilious Weasley, and Hermione Jane Granger sent items to the Muggle orphanage through the Wizard post office. In the subsequent tracking of the package, it was discovered that a chocolate frog in Harry James Potter's package accidentally caused the death of a Muggle postman. So, may I ask? Atticus's face was expressionless, his eyes suddenly sharp. When exactly did the Auror office find the package from Hogsmeade that was seized by the Muggle police? Dawlish had completely lost his arrogant demeanor. Panic flashed in his eyes. He was about to answer when Umbridge's voice rang out from the judgment stand. "Mr. Blaine, I think the Ministry of Magic has just provided complete evidence that proves beyond a doubt that Harry James Potter committed murder." Dolores put on a false smile, but her eyes were filled with hatred as she looked at Atticus. "As for your question, it seems that, well, how should I put it? When the Aurors got the package is just an irrelevant question. Your question seems to be in. According to the Wizengamot Charter of Rights," Atticus's loud voice overpowered Dolores's sweet tone. "The defendant's defense attorney has the right to ask the prosecutor to answer the doubts in the chain of criminal evidence he provided." "Answer the defense's questions, Dawlish," Ms. Bones ordered solemnly. "Aye." Dawlish looked at Fudge and received a warning look. "Maybe. Well, it seems to be. June 21st. June 21st, Atticus asked with a smile. The attack on Hermione Granger took place on January 27th of this year. After the incident, the Aurors immediately intervened and investigated the Hogsmeade post office. However, the package sent by Harry James Potter was not found until the end of June. There was an uproar. The withered green in Harry's eyes came alive again. Professor Blaine was right. If the Ministry of Magic wanted to retrieve the package he sent, it could be done in half a day. How could it take nearly 5 months? Harry stared at Dawlish, paying close attention to what he was about to say. I remembered it wrongly. Dawlish's forehead was covered with sweat, and he shouted, "I just made a mistake." June 21st was the date when the key evidence from another case has been recovered. In fact, Harry James Potter's package was discovered earlier, Atticus Blaine stated sharply. "Earlier?" he pressed, his voice stay-utting through the courtroom. Even Honeyduke's candy store can recall how many candies it sold in a single day 5 months ago. I find it hard to believe that the Auror Office of the British Ministry of Magic could forget such a crucial timeline. Please provide the Wizengamot jury with a precise date. Perhaps it was in February, Dawlish replied, aware of the trap in Blaine's question, but unable to provide a satisfactory answer to what seemed like a straightforward inquiry. February? Atticus Blaine's smile was cold. So the Ministry of Magic had a complete chain of evidence implicating Harry James Potter in a murder at least 4 months ago, yet they only initiated the lawsuit now? As murmurs of discussion spread among the judges, Blaine continued, his tone indifferent. Why did the ministry wait 4 months? Were they waiting for Mr. Potter to finish his summer vacation? Amelia, seated in the stands, glanced at Fudge, realizing the case against Harry Potter was a conspiracy. Perhaps the ministry should offer some explanations, Cornelius, she suggested. Quiet. The Minister of Magic suddenly stood, slamming the gavel with force, and glared fiercely at Atticus Blaine. It's not your place to criticize the ministry's efficiency, Blaine. Certainly, Blaine replied, his expression grim, but I believe the members of the Wizengamot inquiry are perplexed by this. Why can't the Auror Office provide a reasonable answer to such a simple question? The ministry's procedures, Fudge began, his eyes dark and menacing as if he wished to silence Blaine with a look. They're quite complicated. Because this involves the famous Harry Potter, the Ministry of Magic must exercise caution, correct? Umbridge interjected suddenly. Yes, that's right. Fudge, momentarily speechless, seized the opportunity. The Ministry of Magic didn't want Harry Potter to be guilty of murder, so we conducted thorough investigations until we confirmed it was indeed him. The explanation was flimsy and unconvincing. Many jury members exchanged glances, shaking their heads slightly. Some looked towards Albus Dumbledore, who sat at the front, seemingly displeased with Blaine's exposure of the ministry's shortcomings. Instead of satisfaction, Dumbledore appeared quietly dejected. Let's just assume that's the reason, Blaine said, surprising everyone by not pursuing the ministry's evident flaw. Instead, after Fudge and Dolores' explanation, he chuckled softly before raising his voice again. I have a second question. Blaine stepped into the judge's area, his eyes burning as he addressed the jury, leaving Dawlish, who was sweating profusely, aside. Dawlish mentioned that the cause of death for the unfortunate Muggle was suffocation by a chocolate frog. What's the problem with that, Blaine? Fudge demanded sharply, trying to suppress his panic. Oh, what's the problem? Blaine turned to Dawlish, his eyes mocking, causing Dawlish to tremble. As we all know, chocolate frogs are a well-known magical candy sold throughout the European wizarding world, Blaine stated in a deep voice. This product is primarily aimed at children from wizarding families. Innocent children often have whimsical ideas, so this magical candy is equipped with safety measures when it leaves the factory. Safety measures? Fudge, Dolores, and Dawlish all looked bewildered. Most of the judges shared their confusion. For instance, to prevent children from choking, Blaine continued, his gaze coldly fixed on Fudge. It won't happen. The chocolate frog is designed to never jump into someone's throat on its own. Even if a child tries to force it down, it will instantly melt into a liquid form to prevent any mishap. So I must ask. The dimly lit courtroom resonated with Atticus Blaine's somber voice. How did the Muggle postman choke to death on a chocolate frog? End of this chapter. Chapter 1118, Judgment Day 5. How on earth did that Muggle postman choke to death on a chocolate frog? Atticus Blaine's voice cut through the cold courtroom, resonating with authority and clarity. Dolores Umbridge, the resourceful advisor to the minister, could no longer maintain her facade of a smile. Her eyes twitched as she glared at Atticus Blaine, disbelief etched across her face. Chocolate frogs with safety measures? It seemed absurd. Who would have anticipated such a detail? The masterminds behind this plan were prominent figures in the British wizarding world. How could they have overlooked something so trivial? This, fear flickered in Fudge's eyes. I've never heard of, he stammered. I can attest to that, Your Excellency, Minister Fudge. A wizard with a thick brown curly beard and a scholarly air stood up from the bench. He bowed to Fudge with a respectful yet firm demeanor and addressed his peers calmly. Currently, there are over 40 workshops in the British wizarding world producing chocolate frogs, all adhering to unified production standards. Enough! Umbridge's sudden outburst startled the scholarly wizard, who had been offering a popular science explanation. She couldn't allow Blaine to have free rein any longer. Her eyes flashed with malice as she addressed the audience. Even if the chocolate frog has safety features, what does that prove? Blaine, perhaps the chocolate frog Potter bought was defective, leading to this tragedy. The brown-bearded wizard opened his mouth to respond, but Atticus Blaine gave him a reassuring smile and gestured for him to sit down, prompting him to hold his tongue. You mean, Atticus asked slowly, that among the hundreds of thousands of quality chocolate frogs sold in the wizarding world each year, a defective one just happened to be purchased by Harry James Potter, and that particular chocolate frog coincidentally killed a Muggle? Harry blinked his green eyes, wondering if he could truly be that unlucky. Umbridge glanced at the silent Minister of Magic with disappointment, feeling a growing sense of urgency. Under Atticus's questioning, the situation had become precarious. The Ministry of Magic needed to project confidence and resolve, or things could spiral out of control. All the accusations made by the Ministry of Magic against Harry James Potter are based on solid evidence, Blaine. Your questions are mere conjecture. Umbridge's voice was sharp and rapid. There is no doubt that Harry James Potter committed a crime. If you cannot provide conclusive evidence to prove his innocence, then I suggest that all the judges of the Wizengamot sentence Harry James Potter to Azkaban, the prison for all magical beings. You may raise your hands and vote. Azkaban, the prison for all magical beings? Harry's skin prickled with fear, and he looked at Professor Blaine's back almost pleadingly. Say something more. Say something more, Professor. Harry bit his lip so hard that his nails dug into his flesh. Ron and Hermione, momentarily forgetting they were also defendants, looked at Professor Blaine with pleading eyes, their lips slightly parted in anticipation. Dumbledore finally raised his head, the wrinkles on his face smoothing out as he fixed his deep blue eyes, blazing with intensity, on Atticus. You need evidence, don't you? Amid the murmurs of the Wizengamot members, Atticus finally smiled, as if he had been waiting for this moment when the prey would fall into the trap. Do you have evidence? Fudge asked, his voice tinged with horror as he stared at Atticus. Foolish. How could he ask that now? Umbridge seethed with resentment. She no longer cared what evidence Blaine might present, nor did she care that the Minister of Magic was supposed to be presiding over the trial while she meddled in the proceedings. If they allowed Blaine to continue causing trouble at this juncture, the tattered hoods. Their presence sucked the warmth from the room, leaving only a chilling void. The Wizengamot has had enough of your nonsense, Blaine. We don't have time for your fabricated stories. Umbridge shrieked, her voice echoing through the chamber. Need I remind you of the Wizengamot Charter of Rights? Atticus Blaine's voice boomed like thunder, reverberating in the dimly lit room. This was the moment of truth, the critical juncture where decisiveness was paramount. Umbridge, her toad-like eyes bloodshot with fury, was visibly shaken. She and Fudge had never anticipated that Blaine would uncover so many flaws in their hastily concocted conspiracy. To ensure secrecy, Harry Potter's charges had been withheld until the trial commenced, leaving Dumbledore and Blaine with no time to prepare. Members of the Wizengamot, Blaine is clearly disrupting the trial process. I propose we expel him, Cornelius. Umbridge's voice was shrill with desperation. Fudge, caught off guard, hesitated before echoing her sentiment. What? Oh, yes, expulsion. Dolores, Cornelius, what are you trying to do? Ms. Bones rose abruptly, her eyes blazing with indignation. Atticus Blaine is defending in accordance with the Wizengamot Charter of Rights. You have no authority to expel him. I agree, Ludo Bagman chimed in, his expression uneasy. It's unreasonable to expel Blaine. We should at least review his evidence. After all, we're here to try Harry Potter. Umbridge's breath hitched, and she glared at Ludo with a look that could kill. You suddenly attending the trial made me suspect you of betrayal. Betrayal? Ludo stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I'm merely asking Blaine to adhere to the charter. The members of the Wizengamot watched in bewilderment as the ministry's top officials bickered amongst themselves. Was there discord within the Ministry of Magic? Connolly, Umbridge called out again, her frustration mounting. Yes, that's right. Cornelius Fudge finally regained his composure, directing a cold glare at Atticus Blaine, who observed the chaos with a detached calm. Atticus Blaine is interfering with the trial. Expel him. Connolly! Dumbledore's voice cut through the tension as he stood, his blue eyes blazing with intensity. Is this truly the path you wish to take? Dumbledore's commanding presence made Fudge falter momentarily, but he quickly regained his resolve. Dementors, banish Atticus Blaine, he ordered, his voice strained. With a sudden snap, the dim light on the high ceiling shattered, and an icy chill descended upon the room. Harry and his companions, seated in their chairs, watched in shock as the temperature plummeted. The chains binding them turned frigid, biting into Harry's skin and causing him to gasp in pain. The courtroom's already dim firelight was extinguished, plunging the world into a monochrome void. The Wizengamot members, seated in their fan-shaped stands, fell to the ground in terror as ghostly figures descended from the ceiling, encircling Atticus Blaine, who stood resolute before the three defendants. In this colorless world, only Blaine and Dumbledore retained their vibrant hues, their fiery auras casting them as beacons of warmth in the encroaching cold. Finally, Atticus Blaine acted. Standing quietly, he met Dumbledore's gaze and slowly raised his head. At least 30 Dementors closed in, their decaying, skull-like faces visible beneath their tattered hoods. Yet Blaine remained unyielding, a solitary figure of defiance amidst the encroaching darkness. Their massive black robes billowed around them, shrouding their presence in an aura of mystery. Atticus Blaine felt like an empty soul, having lost everything that once mattered. He sighed inwardly, a quiet resignation settling over him. In the next moment, a spark of brilliance ignited in his eyes. A flying snake, adorned with striking black and white wings, darted across his vision. Its presence was both mesmerizing and foreboding. Suddenly, a thunderous, commanding voice echoed through the air, its majestic and inviolable tone leaving no room for defiance. Go back, it boomed, reverberating with an authority that was impossible to ignore. End of this chapter. Chapter 1119, Judgment Day 6. A resonant shout from Atticus Blaine sent an invisible wave rippling through the air. The Dementors caught in its path froze, suspended like insects trapped in amber. Thunder rumbled continuously, echoing ominously. The sight of Atticus confronting the Dementors left Fudge paralyzed with fear. How could this be happening? To restrain Blaine and Dumbledore, Dolores had suggested confiscating everyone's wands before the trial, and Fudge had agreed. Without their wands, even though Blaine and Dumbledore possessed considerable skills, they couldn't possibly overcome the fully armed Aurors. As an additional precaution, Dolores had recommended summoning the Dementors from Azkaban. Despite the inevitable backlash, Fudge had prioritized his safety and consented to the plan. But now, witnessing this scene, he was bewildered. How could someone halt the Dementors with just a shout, without a wand? Atticus wasn't a high-ranking official in the Ministry of Magic. How could the Dementors heed his command? Dolores stared blankly at the Dementors from Azkaban as they reluctantly retreated into the shadows of the high ceiling. The temperature around her began to rise, and colors returned to her vision. Suddenly, Umbridge snapped to attention, her cheeks flushed as if intoxicated. "It was you, Blaine. You attacked Azkaban and helped the prisoners escape," Umbridge shouted, her voice tinged with hysteria. She even collided with a wizard in front of her. "You took the contract from the secret keeper in the Department of Mysteries. How else could the Dementors obey you?" The contract held by the secret keeper? This was a closely guarded secret of the Ministry of Magic. The members of the Wizengamot exchanged bewildered glances. But Fudge's eyes lit up with realization. Yes, it must have been Blaine. The contract controlling the Dementors was in his possession. Otherwise, how could he command them? "Arrest him, Cornelius!" Umbridge screamed, her voice nearly unhinged. "Tell the wizarding world that it was Blaine who hijacked Azkaban." "Dawlish, where are you, Dawlish?" Fudge bellowed, eager to comply. "Take your men and arrest Blaine. He's the one who hijacked Azkaban." "I'm here." Dawlish, who had been thrown aside when the Dementors were released, stumbled out from a corner, flailing his arms. "Quick, arrest Blaine." The Aurors present in the courtroom were undoubtedly carefully selected, all loyal to the Ministry of Magic and the Minister. More than 20 Aurors, wands at the ready, closed in on Atticus from all directions. One Auror took the lead, brandishing his wand. A rope shot out from the darkness, aiming for Atticus. But as it neared him, it entered a realm of intense heat, spontaneously combusting into ashes. "Fools," Atticus muttered, his eyes flashing with a dangerous glint as he glared at Fudge and Umbridge. Was this still the Wizengamot? A member of the Wizengamot cried out in a trembling voice, "Albus!" On one side stood the Minister and Deputy Minister of Magic, appearing deranged, and on the other, the cold-blooded Atticus. The wizards present at the trial sensed impending doom. They huddled together in panic, pinning their hopes on the only person in the courtroom who might avert disaster. "Order your men to stand down, Cornelius." Dumbledore's eyes shone with the brilliance of the sun, and the entire courtroom was enveloped by the formidable magic emanating from his aged form. In the void, the magic surged like a tempestuous sea. "Get Blaine!" Dolores continued to scream, her voice piercing through the chaos. "He is the culprit." A sudden clap of thunder echoed ominously, and Dumbledore's expression shifted dramatically. He turned, his gaze fixed on Atticus Blaine, whose presence was as sharp and intimidating as a drawn sword. Dumbledore's voice boomed like a resonant bell, commanding attention. "Atticus, there's no need for violence." Before Atticus could respond, a loud explosion erupted from the entrance. Harry watched in shock as a dark figure shot through the passage, embedding itself into the rock wall opposite. It was the iron door of the courtroom. Harry's body shook with disbelief. Who could have blown open the courtroom door? The answer soon became clear. It was Rufus Scrimgeour, the head of the Auror office, renowned in the wizarding world for his uncompromising approach. Behind him trailed a group of Aurors. Fudge's face lit up with relief, as if he had found a lifeline. "Rufus, it's you. Arrest Blaine. He's the one who freed the Death Eaters." "Get Blaine, Rufus!" Dolores shouted, shoving Amelia to the ground with a vicious expression. "Capture Blaine, and you'll be the director of the enforcement department." Rufus, initially prepared for chaos, was momentarily taken aback. However, he quickly regained his composure and, with a look of disdain, approached the two top officials of the Ministry of Magic on the podium. Despite his unsteady legs, he moved swiftly. "Atticus," Rufus said, ignoring the astonished looks from Fudge and Dolores. He approached Atticus and produced a wand from his robes. "This is your confiscated wand. I retrieved it." In that frozen moment, all eyes were on the center of the courtroom. Atticus Blaine stood before the three accused young wizards, his expression calm, yet indifferent. When had Atticus gained the support of so many senior officials in the Ministry of Magic? Everyone pondered this question, including Amelia, who lay on the ground, and Dumbledore. As Atticus slowly raised his hand to accept the ebony wand from Rufus Scrimgeour, a collective shiver ran through the room. Dumbledore's lips tightened, and his aged face displayed rare tension. "Atticus!" he called, his eyes meeting Atticus's in a silent exchange. The air was thick with the weight of an impending decision. Dumbledore's heart raced as he watched Atticus, knowing that if Atticus chose violence, he might not be able to stop him without risking everything. Another explosion rocked the courtroom, accompanied by the sound of crumbling walls and frantic shouts. Harry and his companions were already stunned by the unfolding events. "Harry, are you okay?" someone called out. "Ron, what's happening? How's the trial?" I saw Scrimgeour and his men rush in. "Atticus!" Another group emerged from the swirling dust and smoke. Sirius, Remus, Mr. Weasley, Kingsley, and Amelia. They were members of the Order of the Phoenix. The courtroom seemed to be enveloped in a realm of stillness. Those who had just entered were struck silent by the chaos and the tension that hung in the air like a taut bowstring ready to snap. Atticus felt the weight of many gazes upon him: worry, fear, respect, hatred. A myriad of emotions intertwined as they looked to him, awaiting the judgment of fate. His eyes returned to Dumbledore. "Don't make that mistake, Atticus," Dumbledore urged, his voice a plea for reason. Atticus Blaine heard Dumbledore's hoarse voice and remained silent. "Professor Blaine," a voice called out in the hushed courtroom. He turned, his eyebrows slightly raised in curiosity. The three young wizards, who were caught up in the situation, gazed at him with pale faces, trembling under the intense aura he projected. Suddenly, a dazzling golden flame burst forth, momentarily blinding everyone in the room. Atticus waved his wand with a flourish. End of this chapter. Chapter 11120, Judgment Day. Bang, 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 bang. The heavy thud of bodies hitting the ground echoed through the courtroom as cages engulfed in golden flames materialized out of thin air, imprisoning Fudge, Umbridge, Dawlish, and the other Aurors who had been guarding the proceedings. Atticus Blaine had orchestrated this dramatic turn of events. The members of the Wizengamot, along with the Order of the Phoenix and others who had rushed in, stared at Atticus in shock and fear, waiting for him to explain his actions. "Ah!" Fudge shrieked, his voice high-pitched and panicked, as he cowered within the fiery cage, too terrified to touch its blazing bars. "You've been exposed, haven't you, Blaine? You've been plotting to overthrow the Ministry of Magic, and now—" Whoosh! He turned to Dumbledore, his voice rising in accusation. "I told you, didn't I, Dumbledore? This young man you recruited has always harbored ambitions. Look at what he's doing." "Connolly," Dumbledore began, his voice calm yet tinged with sadness. Atticus had not chosen to kill indiscriminately, and for that, Dumbledore felt a rare sense of relief. Turning to face the Minister of Magic trapped in the fiery cage, Dumbledore's expression was one of sorrow. "I warned you, Connolly, not to become too consumed by power. It can make you lose yourself. Your current predicament is a result of being blinded by it. I don't understand what you're saying, Dumbledore, but if you have any conscience left—" Fudge bellowed, still not grasping the gravity of the situation, or perhaps unwilling to face it. "Subdue Blaine for the Ministry of Magic. I know you can do it, Dumbledore. You're allowing a dark wizard, more evil than you-know-who, to destroy the order we've worked so hard to establish." Dumbledore merely shook his head slightly, and those in the Order of the Phoenix could sense the weight of his years in that simple gesture. "Atticus," Sirius said, moving quickly to Harry's side. As Dumbledore and Fudge confronted each other, Sirius whispered to Harry, trying to understand what had transpired. But Harry's green eyes were wide and unseeing, his voice lost, as if paralyzed by fear. Seeing the alarm on the faces of the young wizards, Remus realized something extraordinary must have occurred in the courtroom within the past hour. After a moment's hesitation, Remus addressed Atticus softly. "I understand your desire to defend Harry and the others, but imprisoning the Minister of Magic and the Aurors," Remus's voice was uneasy, "doesn't seem like the right course of action." With a flick of his wand, Atticus repaired the shattered courtroom door. Then, with a calm demeanor, He pointed his wand at Fudge and Umbridge, silencing their curses and protests within the flame cages. Atticus, Amelia spoke up, her voice tinged with unease after witnessing the scene. She glanced at Dumbledore, who seemed to be silently endorsing Atticus's actions. After a brief pause, she continued, I know Cornelius had no justification for ordering the Dementors and Aurors to attack you, and I understand your anger, but— Amelia, Atticus interrupted, his voice firm. I would like you to continue the trial in place of the former Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge. Former Minister of Magic? Fudge's eyes bulged with disbelief, his face contorted in rage. Continue the trial? The members of the Wizengamot, hidden in various corners of the courtroom, remained silent. Compared to the current situation, even if Harry Potter had indeed harmed a few muggles, it seemed insignificant. The trial continues, Atticus declared, his voice unwavering. Even Amelia hesitated, but Atticus turned, surveying the room, meeting the eyes of those who dared not look at him. Atticus Blaine appeared calm, the sharpness that had previously radiated from him now subdued. Whether muggles or wizards, the peaceful life both groups enjoy is built upon a stable judicial system. I want to assure you that I have no intention of using force to override the law. The jury members exchanged cautious glances, uncertain about Atticus Blaine's statement. Amelia still frowned, but the calmness in Atticus's eyes helped her make a decision. Very well, Amelia said, adjusting her monocle. Before the chaos, you seem to be referring to the evidence in the case of Harry James Potter allegedly murdering the Muggle postman. Killed the Muggle postman? Sirius exclaimed, staring at Harry in shock. Is this true? Is this what the Ministry is charging you with? Sirius, Atticus interjected. If you're interested, you may sit in on the proceedings. All members of the Wizengamot, please return to your seats. Aurors and others, you may also observe the proceedings. Despite the tension, no one dared to voice any objections, as Atticus still held his wand. With a flick, Atticus moved Fudge and Umbridge from the fire cage to the back of the 3 judge chairs, and the Aurors loyal to them were neatly arranged by Atticus. Atticus, you may present your evidence now, Amelia said solemnly, standing where Fudge had been moments before. Earlier, the head of the Auror office recounted the story of Harry James Potter's alleged murder. A Muggle postman died under mysterious circumstances involving a chocolate frog, Atticus explained, turning to face Fudge and Umbridge, who glared at him with hatred. Fortunately, another Muggle witnessed the postman's death. The courtroom fell silent as everyone absorbed Atticus's words. Fudge and Umbridge, who had been glaring at Atticus, suddenly appeared bewildered. After a few moments, they turned to Dawlish, their expressions suggesting they wanted to tear him apart. Did anyone witness it? Amelia asked, surprised. Is this Muggle your evidence? Atticus nodded slightly, raising his arm and sweeping his wand across the space. Lawrence's figure gradually materialized from nothingness. Compared to before, Lawrence looked particularly disheveled. His gray hair clung wetly to his head, his well-tailored clothes soaked with sweat, and his old face was etched with fear. Lawrence, who had entered the courtroom with Atticus and Dumbledore, had witnessed everything. He was acutely aware that Atticus had initiated a coup in the wizarding world. You are. Harry was momentarily stunned, then jumped up from his seat. Are you Mr. Lawrence from Blaine Manor? Oh, yes, you remember correctly, Lawrence replied with a strained smile. You remember me, Vernon's nephew? Of course I remember, Harry responded immediately. You're unlucky, kid, Lawrence said, wiping sweat from his brow with a wry smile. A Muggle appearing in the Ministry of Magic's courtroom caused many judges to frown inwardly. Atticus's actions would have been highly inappropriate without prior permission. However, no one dared to challenge Atticus now. This is Mr. Lawrence, the butler of the Muggle company boss of the family where Harry Potter grew up, which is why they know each other, Atticus explained calmly. Amelia nodded, the wrinkles on her forehead easing. It is indeed a fortunate coincidence. So, according to Atticus Blaine, Lawrence, you witnessed something, didn't you? Yes, ma'am, and members of the jury, Lawrence said, turning to bow respectfully to Amelia on the platform. I remember it very clearly. It was January 28th, a day marked by relentless rain. I had been invited by the Haas orphanage to attend a thank-you party in appreciation of a donation I had made earlier.